The dust came first. Dr. Mara Vance saw it from the passenger window of the Jeep, a rust-colored cloud rising from the settlement like smoke from a dying fire. The driver, a boy barely 20 with a rifle he clearly didn't know how to use, kept his eyes fixed on the rutted track ahead. He hadn't spoken in an hour. That suited Mara fine. She'd learned years ago that silence was often the most honest conversation you could have. The mission compound materialized through the haze like a mirage, all sun-bleached wood and corrugated metal, encircled by a fence that looked more decorative than defensive. Beyond it, the landscape stretched flat and merciless. Thorn trees twisted by wind, earth cracked open like old wounds. This was the kind of place maps forgot to include. "How much farther?" Mara asked, though she could already see they were close. 2 minutes, ma'am." The boy's voice cracked. "Mrs. Graves will be waiting." Mara suppressed a smile. Mrs. Graves. She'd heard about Eleanor Graves during the briefing in the Capitol, a woman who ran the mission with the efficiency of a military commander and the moral certainty of someone who'd never been proven wrong. The regional coordinator had chosen his words carefully. "She maintains order in difficult circumstances. You'll need to respect her methods." What he'd meant, Mara knew, was, don't make waves. Don't challenge the power structure. Do your job and keep your head down. Mara had never been good at keeping her head down. The Jeep rattled through the compound gate, and a group of women emerged from the main building, a converted warehouse that served as chapel, school, and administrative center. They moved in a cluster, their faces shaded by wide-brimmed hats, their cotton dresses identical in their modesty. At the front walked Eleanor Graves. She was smaller than Mara had imagined, compact and wire-thin, with silver hair pulled back so tightly it must have hurt. Her face had the hardened quality of someone who'd spent decades squinting into harsh sunlight and harsher truths. But her eyes, pale blue and sharp as surgical steel, missed nothing. The Jeep stopped. Mara stepped out, her boots hitting the packed earth with a solid thud. She wore practical clothes, cargo pants, a linen shirt, a canvas jacket despite the heat. Her medical bag, scarred from a dozen assignments, hung from her shoulder. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who'd worked in places where infrastructure was a luxury and survival was the only metric that mattered. Eleanor approached with measured steps, her expression neutral but assessing. The other women hung back, watching with the careful attention of people who'd learned that new arrivals could mean either salvation or catastrophe. "Dr. Vance." Eleanor extended her hand. Her grip was firm, dry, brief. "We've been expecting you for 3 weeks." "The roads were worse than anticipated," Mara replied evenly. "Flooding in the southern region." "The rainy season ended 6 weeks ago." Mara held Eleanor's gaze. "But the rain doesn't always check the calendar." A flicker of something, annoyance, amusement, crossed Eleanor's face. "Indeed. Well, you're here now. That's what matters." She turned to the women behind her. "This is Dr. Vance. She'll be managing the medical clinic until Dr. Okonkwo returns from his sabbatical." If he returns, Mara thought, but didn't say. She'd read between the lines of her assignment. Dr. Okonkwo had suffered what the reports euphemistically called exhaustion, which could mean anything from burnout to a complete breakdown. The mission had been without a physician for 2 months. People had suffered. Some had probably died. And Eleanor Graves had somehow held this place together through sheer force of will. "Come," Eleanor said. "I'll show you the clinic. We can discuss the current cases." She walked briskly toward a smaller building set apart from the others, and Mara followed. Behind them, the women dispersed, their whispers creating a sound like wind through dry grass. The clinic was a single-room structure with screened windows, concrete floors, and walls that had once been white. Medical supplies lined metal shelves with obsessive precision, bandages here, medications there, instruments arranged by size and function. Everything was clean, organized, and woefully inadequate. Mara did a quick inventory: basic antibiotics, oral rehydration salts, anti-malarials, some surgical supplies, local anesthetics. No blood products. No imaging equipment. No backup if something went truly wrong. "We do what we can with what we have," Eleanor said, reading Mara's expression. "The Lord provides." Mara bit back her first response. "What's the population?" 43 residents, 26 women, 11 children, 6 men. Eleanor's voice was precise, factual. We also serve approximately 200 people from the surrounding villages. They come for market day, for medical care, for education. 6 men, Mara repeated. That's an unusual ratio. The mission's primary purpose is providing refuge for women and children fleeing difficult circumstances. The men are either staff or family members. Eleanor's tone suggested the topic was closed. Currently, we have 3 patients requiring immediate attention. The first is Mary Adeyemi, 14 years old, suspected malaria with severe anemia. The second is David Okafor, 7 years old, persistent cough, possibly tuberculosis. The third is Catherine Hale. Something in how Eleanor said the last name made Mara look up. What's her condition? 38 weeks pregnant, first child. She's 39 years old. Mara felt her stomach tighten. Any complications? High blood pressure, some swelling. She refuses bed rest. Eleanor's mouth thinned. Her husband Thomas encourages her stubbornness. I'll need to examine her immediately. I expected you would. Eleanor moved toward the door. She's in the residence building with her husband. I should warn you, Thomas can be difficult. He has strong opinions about medical intervention. And you? Eleanor turned back. I believe in order, Dr. Vance. This community survives because we maintain structure, discipline, and faith. Whatever Dr. Okonkwo may have told you. He didn't tell me anything. He's not in a condition to tell anyone anything. The words hung in the air between them. Eleanor's face remained impassive, but Mara saw her fingers tighten briefly against her skirt. Dr. Okonkwo was a good man, Eleanor said finally, but he lacked the fortitude necessary for this work. He let emotions cloud his judgment. He became too attached to outcomes he couldn't control. She stepped closer, and Mara caught the scent of lavender soap and sun-dried fabric. I won't make allowances for the same weakness twice. I'm not here to make friends, Mara said flatly. I'm here to practice medicine. Then we understand each other. Eleanor opened the door. I'll take you to Catherine. The residence building was larger than the clinic, but no more comfortable. A long, narrow structure divided into private rooms with a common area at one end and a kitchen at the other. Women moved through the space with quiet efficiency, preparing the evening meal, tending to children, mending clothes. They looked up as Eleanor and Mara entered, their conversations dying mid-sentence. Eleanor led Mara down a dim corridor to a room at the far end. She knocked twice, a sharp, authoritative sound. Come in, a male voice called. Thomas Hale sat beside the bed, his hand wrapped around his wife's. He was perhaps 45 with the weathered skin and calloused hands of someone who worked outdoors. His face was handsome in a rough-hewn way. Strong jaw, deep-set eyes, the kind of features that looked carved rather than formed. But it was his expression that struck Mara. Fierce protectiveness mixed with barely concealed fear. On the bed, Catherine Hale looked small and impossibly fragile. Her dark hair was damp with sweat, her face puffy, her body swollen with the weight of late pregnancy. Her breathing came in short, shallow gasps. Catherine Thomas, Eleanor said. This is Dr. Vance. She'll be managing your care from now on. Thomas stood slowly, reluctantly releasing his wife's hand. He was tall, several inches over 6 feet, and he used that height deliberately, positioning himself between Mara and Catherine. We don't need a new doctor, he said. His accent marked him as American, Midwest somewhere. Catherine's fine. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. Mara set her medical bag on the table beside the bed and met his eyes directly. Mr. Hale, I'm going to examine your wife now. You can stay in the room or wait outside. Your choice. I'm staying. Fine. Mara turned to Catherine. Mrs. Hale, I'm Dr. Vance. Can you tell me how you're feeling? Catherine tried to smile, but it came out as more of a grimace. Tired, hot, ready for this to be over. Her voice was soft, educated, American. But I'm all right. Thomas worries too much. How's your blood pressure been? A little high, Catherine admitted. But Eleanor says that's normal at this stage. Mara glanced at Eleanor, who stood near the door with her arms crossed. Did Dr. Okonkwo give you readings? 140/90 at last check, Eleanor said. 2 weeks ago. And since then? We don't have a blood pressure cuff. Dr. Okonkwo took it with him. Mara closed her eyes briefly. fighting down a surge of frustration. Mrs. Hale, I'm going to need to examine you, check your blood pressure, listen to the baby's heartbeat, see how far along you are. We know how far along she is, Thomas said. 38 weeks. The baby's due in 2 weeks. Due dates are estimates, Mr. Hale. Babies don't always follow the schedule. Mara pulled out her stethoscope. Mrs. Hale, can you lie back for me? What followed was a basic examination hampered by limited equipment and a hostile audience. Mara worked methodically, noting the excessive swelling in Catherine's hands and feet, the high blood pressure, 150/95, worse than Eleanor's last reading, the baby's position, which seemed normal but was impossible to confirm without ultrasound. How's the baby? Catherine asked anxiously. Strong heartbeat, active movement, those are good signs. Mara straightened, choosing her words carefully. But your blood pressure concerns me. Combined with the swelling and your age, you're at significant risk for preeclampsia. What does that mean? Thomas demanded. It means that if her blood pressure continues to rise, both she and the baby could be in danger. Seizures, stroke, premature separation of the placenta. Mara looked directly at Catherine. You need to be on bed rest immediately. And if your condition deteriorates, we may need to induce labor early or perform a cesarean section. No, Thomas said flatly. Mr. Hale, I said no. He moved closer to his wife's bed. Catherine is not having surgery. She's not being pumped full of drugs. She's going to have this baby the natural way the Lord intended. The natural way has a mortality rate you might find unacceptable, Mara said coldly. We have faith. Faith doesn't lower blood pressure. The room fell silent. Eleanor stirred near the door. Dr. Vance, perhaps we could discuss this privately. There's nothing to discuss, Thomas interrupted. Catherine stays here. She rests. She has the baby when she's ready. We're not doing anything extreme. Mara looked at Catherine, who had tears running down her swollen face. Mrs. Hale, this is your decision. What do you want? Catherine glanced at her husband, then back at Mara. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. I want what's best for the baby. Then listen to the doctor, Mara began. I'll rest, Catherine said quickly. I'll do the bed rest, but no surgery unless it's absolutely necessary. Please. Mara wanted to argue, to explain in brutal detail what absolutely necessary meant in a place with no blood bank, no surgical team, no intensive care. But she'd worked in enough desperate situations to know when pushing harder would only make things worse. All right, she said finally. Complete bed rest. I'll check on you twice a day. If anything changes, any headaches, vision problems, severe pain, you send for me immediately. Understood? Catherine nodded, relief washing over her face. Mara packed her equipment, her movements sharp with controlled anger. As she turned to leave, Thomas caught her arm. We're not trying to be difficult, he said quietly. We've prayed for this child for 15 years. Catherine's had 3 miscarriages. This is our miracle. We just want to protect it. Mara looked down at his hand on her arm until he released her. Then let me do my job, Mr. Hale. Because miracles don't happen in a vacuum. They require preparation, resources, and sometimes very unglamorous medical intervention. She walked out before he could respond. Eleanor caught up with her outside the building. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed obscene in their beauty. That was poorly handled, Eleanor said. Mara stopped walking and turned. Which part? The part where I did a competent medical assessment? Or the part where I tried to prevent a catastrophic outcome? The part where you disrespected their beliefs. I disrespected their ignorance. There's a difference. Eleanor's expression hardened. Dr. Vance, you need to understand something. These people have been through trauma. Many of them have fled violence, abuse, situations that would break most people. They've rebuilt their lives here through faith and community. If you come in dismissing what sustains them, I'm not dismissing anything. I'm trying to keep a woman and her baby alive. By terrifying her, by creating conflict with her husband, by giving her accurate medical information. Mara's voice rose despite herself. That woman has preeclampsia. If it progresses to eclampsia, she'll seize. Her blood pressure will spike. The placenta could rupture. She could stroke. The baby could die from lack of oxygen. These aren't theoretical concerns. They're real, immediate dangers. And what exactly do you propose to do about them? Eleanor's voice was quiet but cutting. We have no obstetrician, no surgical suite, no blood products. If something goes catastrophically wrong, all the medical knowledge in the world won't save her. You know that. I know that. So what's the point of creating panic? Mara opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. Because Eleanor was right. In a fully equipped hospital with specialists and technology, Catherine's situation would be manageable. Here, it was a disaster waiting to happen. I can evacuate her, Mara said finally. There's a hospital in the capital, 3-day drive, but she won't go. Thomas won't allow it. And even if they would, the roads aren't safe. Eleanor's voice softened slightly. Dr. Vance, I understand your frustration. I do. But you need to accept the reality of where you are. This isn't a first-world hospital. This is a frontier mission in a region where violence is common and infrastructure is non-existent. We do the best we can with what we have. Sometimes that means accepting outcomes we don't like. I don't accept preventable deaths. Then you're going to have a very difficult time here. Eleanor turned toward the main building. Dinner is at 7. I suggest you attend. The community needs to see you as part of our fellowship, not an outsider imposing foreign ideas. She walked away, her spine straight, her steps measured and certain. Mara stood alone in the gathering darkness, listening to the sounds of the settlement settling in for the night, children's laughter, the clang of pots, someone singing a hymn in a language she didn't recognize. In the distance, she could hear the wind moving through the thorn trees, carrying dust and the promise of nothing good. The dining hall was crowded and loud with conversation. Long tables filled the space, with benches packed tight with residents and staff. The meal was simple: rice, beans, some kind of stewed vegetables, but plentiful. People ate with the focused attention of those who never took food for granted. Mara found a seat at the end of one table, next to a young woman who introduced herself as Sarah. She was maybe 25, with careful eyes and hands that moved constantly, never quite still. "You're the new doctor," Sarah said. It wasn't a question. "I am." Dr. Okonkwo was kind. He never made you feel stupid for being sick. Sarah pushed rice around her plate. "Is he coming back?" "I don't know," Mara said honestly. Sarah nodded, as if she'd expected that answer. "People don't usually come back once they leave. Not to places like this." "How long have you been here?" 3 years. I came when I was pregnant." Sarah's voice dropped. "My boyfriend. He wasn't a good person. Eleanor took me in, helped me have my baby, gave me a place where I didn't have to be afraid." "And your child?" "Daniel. He's 2 now. Healthy, happy." Sarah's face softened. "Because of this place. Because of what Eleanor built." Mara glanced toward the front of the room, where Eleanor sat with a group of older women, leading what looked like an informal discussion. She commanded attention effortlessly, her authority so natural it seemed almost invisible. "She's strict," Sarah continued. "The rules can feel harsh sometimes, but they keep us safe. Structure, discipline, faith, that's what Eleanor always says. And it works. This place works." "Until it doesn't," Mara murmured. Sarah looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" Before Mara could answer, a commotion erupted near the entrance. A young man, barely more than a boy, burst through the door, his face flushed with exertion. "Mrs. Graves," he called out. "Mrs. Graves, you need to come. There's something wrong with little Emma." Eleanor rose immediately, her meal forgotten. "What kind of wrong?" "Fever. She's burning up, and she's throwing up everything." The room fell silent. Mara stood, grabbing her medical bag from where she'd stashed it under the table. "Where is she?" The boy looked uncertain, glancing between Mara and Eleanor. Eleanor nodded. "Take us both. Quickly." They followed him through the compound to one of the smaller residential buildings. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of sickness. A woman, Emma's mother, Mara assumed, sat beside a narrow bed, tears streaming down her face. On the bed, a girl of perhaps 6 lay motionless except for the rapid rise and fall of her chest. Mara knelt beside the bed, touching the child's forehead. The heat was intense, radiating through her skin like a furnace. "How long has she been like this?" "Since this morning," the mother said. She woke up saying her head hurt. Then the fever started. Then the vomiting. Mara pulled out her thermometer. Any other symptoms? Rash, stiff neck, confusion? She said her stomach hurt, and she's been so thirsty. The thermometer read 104.3 degrees Fahrenheit, dangerously high. Mara checked Emma's neck, slightly stiff. Her eyes, pupils equal and reactive, but the child seemed lethargic. When Mara pressed on her abdomen, Emma cried out. "We need to cool her down immediately," Mara said. "Lukewarm water, cloths. Not cold, lukewarm. And I need someone to bring me oral rehydration solution from the clinic." Eleanor dispatched people with quick efficiency. Within minutes, they had everything Mara needed. She worked methodically, sponging the child's burning skin, getting small sips of fluid into her, administering antipyretics. "What is it?" Eleanor asked quietly. "Could be several things. Malaria, typhoid, meningitis." Mara didn't look up from her patient. "I won't know without labs, and we don't have the capability here." "What's the treatment?" "Depends on what it is. If it's malaria, we have medication for that. Typhoid, antibiotics. Meningitis?" Mara paused. "Meningitis would require hospitalization in a facility we don't have." "Can we save her?" It was the first time Mara had heard anything approaching vulnerability in Eleanor's voice. She looked up and saw genuine fear in those pale blue eyes. "I'm going to try," Mara said, "but I need you to understand. If this is bacterial meningitis, her chances aren't good. Not here. Not with what we have." Eleanor's face closed off again, the vulnerability disappearing behind that wall of rigid control. "Then we pray," she said simply. Over the next 3 hours, Mara fought to stabilize Emma. The fever came down slightly, but not enough. The vomiting continued. The child drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally crying out in pain or confusion. Mara administered broad-spectrum antibiotics, antimalarials, everything she had that might help, knowing it might not be enough. Around midnight, Eleanor sent the mother to rest and took her place beside the bed. Mara continued her vigil on the other side, checking vitals, adjusting treatment, watching for any change. "You care," Eleanor said suddenly. "I wasn't sure you would." Mara looked up, surprised. "Why wouldn't I?" "You're so clinical, detached. I thought maybe you saw these people as cases rather than individuals." "Detachment is how I stay functional," Mara said. "If I let myself feel everything, I'd be useless. But that doesn't mean I don't care." Eleanor nodded slowly, studying Emma's small face. Dr. Okonkwo cared too much. Every death destroyed him a little more. By the end, he was crying during examinations, apologizing to patients for things beyond his control. He couldn't maintain the necessary distance. And you think that was his weakness? I think it made him ineffective. Or maybe it made him human. Mara adjusted Emma's IV line. "There's a difference between professional detachment and emotional shutdown, Mrs. Graves. One helps you function, the other turns you into something cold. Cold keeps you alive out here. So does compassion, sometimes." They sat in silence after that. Two women on opposite sides of a dying child, each holding their own version of how to survive in a world that took more than it gave. At dawn, Emma's fever finally broke. The vomiting stopped. Her breathing steadied. When the mother returned, the child opened her eyes and asked for water. Mara allowed herself one moment of relief before packing up her supplies. "She's not out of danger yet. I'll need to monitor her closely for the next few days, and she'll need rest, fluids, continued medication." "You saved her," the mother said, tears of gratitude replacing tears of fear. "Not yet," Mara replied, "but maybe." Outside, the sun was rising, painting the compound in shades of gold and amber. Mara walked slowly toward her assigned quarters, a small room in the staff building that she hadn't even seen yet. Her body ached with exhaustion, her mind buzzed with adrenaline crash, and she could smell the sickness on her own clothes. Eleanor walked beside her, silent until they reached Mara's door. "You did well tonight," Eleanor said. "We'll see. If she makes it through the next 72 hours, then I did well." "You don't accept praise easily, do you?" Mara turned to face her. "I don't accept anything easily, Mrs. Graves. It's kept me alive in places that chew up people who trust too quickly. This isn't one of those places. Isn't it? Mara opened her door. An isolated mission in unstable territory with inadequate resources and rigid hierarchy? It's exactly one of those places. The only question is how long before the facade cracks. She went inside and closed the door before Eleanor could respond. The next week passed in a blur of activity. Mara established a routine: morning rounds, afternoon clinic hours, evening check-ins with critical patients. She treated malaria, infected wounds, respiratory infections, malnutrition, dehydration. The work was endless and often frustrating, hampered by lack of equipment and the constant tension between her medical judgment and the community's resistance to anything that challenged their worldview. Emma recovered, slowly but steadily. Catherine remained on bed rest, her blood pressure fluctuating but stable. Thomas hovered constantly, suspicious of every intervention, questioning every decision. Eleanor maintained her iron control, mediating conflicts, enforcing rules, keeping the fragile peace. And Mara began to see the cracks. Small things at first: a shortage of clean water, a delay in a supply shipment, whispered conversations that stopped when she approached. The way people's eyes would drift toward the horizon, as if watching for something. On the 8th day during evening rounds, she found Sarah sitting outside the clinic, staring at nothing. "Are you all right?" Mara asked. Sarah jumped, startled. "Fine, I'm fine." She wasn't fine. Her hands were shaking and her face had the pinched look of someone fighting panic. Mara sat down beside her. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, it's nothing." "Sarah." The young woman turned to her, and Mara saw real fear in her eyes. "There are rumors," Sarah said quietly, "about soldiers, about fighting, getting closer." "What kind of fighting?" "The warlord, Maburo. They say he's been moving through the region, taking over villages, conscripting young men, taking supplies." Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. "Taking women." Mara felt her blood go cold. "How close?" "I don't know, maybe 100 miles, maybe less. The traders won't come anymore. They say it's too dangerous, and last week some refugees passed through. They said Mabuto's forces burned their village to the ground." "Does Eleanor know?" "Eleanor knows everything." Sarah stood abruptly. "But she says we're safe here, that we're protected, that we just need to have faith." She walked away quickly before Mara could ask anything else. That night, Mara confronted Eleanor in her office, a small room in the main building lined with ledgers and supply lists and carefully maintained records. "We need to talk about security," Mara said without preamble. Eleanor looked up from her paperwork. "We have adequate security. 2 untrained boys with rifles that probably don't work? That's not adequate. That's a joke." "What would you suggest? A military garrison? Armed guards?" "I'd suggest having a realistic evacuation plan. If this Mabuto and his forces are as close as people say..." "People say a lot of things," Eleanor interrupted. "Most of it is fear and rumor. Mabuto is a problem, yes, but he's not our problem. We're neutral. We don't take sides. We provide humanitarian aid. Warlords don't care about neutrality." "Then we'll deal with that if it happens." Eleanor's voice was firm. "But I will not create panic based on speculation. This community needs stability, Dr. Vance. If I start preparing for the worst, people will assume the worst is inevitable. Fear spreads faster than disease." "So does denial." Eleanor stood, her small frame radiating authority. "I've kept this mission running for 12 years, through drought, epidemics, political instability, and violence that would make your hair turn white. I've done it by maintaining order, discipline, and faith, not by giving in to every disaster scenario someone dreams up." "And if the disaster isn't a scenario? If it's real? Then we'll handle it?" Eleanor's expression softened slightly. "I understand you're concerned, but you've been here barely a week. You don't know these people. You don't know what they've survived. Trust that I have their best interests at heart." Mara wanted to argue, to push harder, to make Eleanor see the danger. But she'd worked with enough administrators to know when she was hitting a wall. Eleanor had made her decision, and nothing Mara said would change it. "Fine," Mara said. "But when this goes sideways, don't expect me to pretend I didn't warn you. She left before Eleanor could respond. 3 days later, the epidemic started. It began with a child, not Emma, but a 4-year-old boy named Samuel. Fever, vomiting, diarrhea. Then his sister. Then 2 women from the village who'd attended market day. Then more children, more adults, spreading through the compound with terrifying speed. Mara recognized it immediately. Cholera. Waterborne, highly contagious, deadly if untreated. And with their limited resources, treatment was going to be a nightmare. She found Eleanor in the dining hall trying to organize meal distribution while sick people lay groaning on benches. "We need to shut this place down," Mara said. "Now. Everyone who's sick needs to be isolated. Everyone who's been in contact with them needs to be monitored. We need to identify the water source and shut it off. That will cause panic. Panic is better than death." Mara's voice cut through the chaos. "This is cholera, Mrs. Graves. If we don't act immediately, we'll lose half the population in a week." Eleanor's face went pale. "Are you certain?" "Completely. I've seen it before. We need to move fast." For the first time since Mara had arrived, she saw Eleanor's control waver. The older woman looked around the dining hall, at the sick, the frightened, the desperate, and for just a moment her face showed the weight of every decision she'd ever made. Then she straightened her spine and nodded. "Tell me what you need." What followed was organized chaos. Mara set up an isolation ward in one of the empty storage buildings. She trained volunteers in basic infection control, hand washing, safe handling of contaminated materials, oral rehydration therapy. She traced the outbreak to a contaminated well on the southern edge of the compound and ordered it sealed. Eleanor mobilized the community with military efficiency. Sick patients were moved to isolation. Contact tracing began. Supplies were inventoried and rationed. Rules were enforced with an iron fist. Anyone who broke quarantine faced immediate expulsion from the mission. For 3 days, they worked around the clock. Mara treated patient after patient, pushing fluids, administering antibiotics to the worst cases, teaching people how to recognize danger signs. She slept in 90-minute increments, ate standing up, and lost track of time entirely. On the 4th day, they ran out of IV fluids. "We have oral rehydration solution," Eleanor said, scanning their dwindling supplies. "Will that be enough?" "For mild to moderate cases, yes. For severe dehydration?" Mara shook her head. "They need IV fluids or they'll die." "How many severe cases do we have?" "Right now, 4. But that number could double by tomorrow." Eleanor was silent for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "We'll have to prioritize." Mara understood immediately what she meant. With limited resources, they'd have to choose who got treatment and who didn't, who lived and who died. "No," Mara said flatly. "We don't have a choice." "There's always a choice." Mara's mind raced. "The capital. They'll have supplies. If we send a vehicle, it's a 3-day round trip. These people don't have 3 days. Then we make our own." Mara was already moving, pulling supplies from the shelves. Sugar, salt, water. Basic oral rehydration solution. We can increase the frequency, push fluids constantly, monitor for deterioration. It's not ideal, but it might keep them alive long enough. "Dr. Vance," Eleanor's voice stopped her. "Even if we could keep them alive for 3 days, we don't have a vehicle to send. The Jeep broke down yesterday. The truck hasn't run in 6 months." Mara felt the walls closing in. "Then what do you suggest?" "We do what we can with what we have. We prioritize the patients most likely to survive. We make the hard choices." "You mean we let people die?" "I mean we acknowledge reality." Eleanor's voice was steady, but Mara could see the cost in her eyes. "This is what I was trying to tell you, Dr. Vance. Out here, we don't have the luxury of saving everyone. Sometimes survival means making decisions that would be unconscionable anywhere else." Mara wanted to scream, to rage against the unfairness of it all. But Eleanor was right. They were trapped by circumstances, by geography, by the brutal mathematics of limited resources and unlimited need. "I'll need to examine each patient," Mara said finally. "Make individual assessments. Some might respond better to aggressive oral rehydration than others." Eleanor nodded. "Do what you think is best. I'll support your decisions." It was the first time Eleanor had given her complete authority, and Mara hated that it came at this moment. when the choice was who would die rather than who would live. Well, by the end of the week, they'd lost 3 patients: an elderly man, a teenager with underlying health problems, and a young mother who'd hidden her symptoms until it was too late. The rest stabilized, slowly improving as the epidemic burned itself out. Mara stood in the clinic, looking at the rows of recovering patients, and felt nothing. No triumph, no relief, just a hollow exhaustion that went bone deep. Sarah found her there. "You saved most of them," she said softly. "That's something." "Most isn't all." "It never is, not out here." Sarah hesitated, then added, "Eleanor wants to see you, in her office." Mara found Eleanor at her desk, writing in one of her endless ledgers. The older woman looked as exhausted as Mara felt, her face drawn, her hands trembling slightly. "Sit," Eleanor said. Mara sat. "You did well," Eleanor said. "Under impossible circumstances, you made difficult decisions and saved lives. The community is grateful." "But?" Eleanor looked up. "But nothing. I simply wanted to tell you that you were right to push as hard as you did. If you'd listened to me, if you'd waited, more people would have died." It was as close to an apology as Mara suspected she'd ever get from Eleanor Graves. "Thank you," Mara said. "Don't thank me yet." Eleanor closed her ledger. "Because now we have a different problem. During the epidemic, our security deteriorated. We were too focused on the sick to pay attention to anything else. And according to the reports I've been receiving, Mabuto's forces are now less than 50 miles away." Mara felt her stomach drop. 50 miles, that's 2 days' march, maybe less, depending on their speed. Eleanor's voice was calm, but Mara could see the fear underneath. "I've been in contact with the regional coordinator. He's authorized an evacuation." "When?" "As soon as we can arrange transport. There's a convoy coming from the capital, military escort, trucks, everything we need. They should be here in 4 days." "Oh, 4 days." Mara did the math in her head. "If Mabuto's forces move fast, well, then they might get here first." Eleanor met her eyes. "Which is why I need you to start preparing the critical patients for transport. Catherine Hale, in particular. She needs to be ready to move at a moment's notice." Mara thought of Catherine, still on bed rest, her blood pressure stable but precarious. Moving her could trigger labor, or worse. Staying here if Mabuto arrives will be worse, much worse. Eleanor's voice dropped. "You've heard the stories, what his forces do to women, to children. We can't protect them, Dr. Vance. If they come, we're defenseless." For the first time since arriving, Mara saw real terror in Eleanor's eyes, and she understood that beneath all the rigid control, all the faith and discipline and order, Eleanor was just as scared as everyone else. She'd just gotten very good at hiding it. "I'll talk to Catherine," Mara said. "Try to make her understand." "And Thomas?" "Thomas will do whatever he thinks protects his family. The question is whether he'll listen to reason." Eleanor smiled without humor. "In my experience, desperate men rarely do." That evening, Mara found Thomas and Catherine in their room. Catherine was sitting up, her hands on her swollen belly, her face worried. Thomas stood by the window, staring out at the compound with the expression of a man facing an impossible choice. "I need to talk to you both," Mara said. They listened as she explained the situation, the approaching danger, the evacuation plan, the need to move Catherine despite the risks. "No," Thomas said before she'd even finished. "We're not going." "Mr. Hale, I said no. We've heard those stories too, about convoys being attacked, about evacuations turning into chaos. Catherine's safer here." "She's not," Mara said bluntly. "If Mabuto's forces arrive, no one is safe, especially not pregnant women." Catherine made a small, frightened sound. Thomas moved to her side immediately, taking her hand. "What if traveling triggers labor?" he asked. "What if something goes wrong on the road?" "Then I'll handle it. But at least we'll be moving towards safety and proper medical facilities, not sitting here waiting for violence to find us." "You can't guarantee her safety." "No," Mara admitted, "but I can guarantee that staying here is suicide." Thomas looked at his wife, and something passed between them, a whole conversation in a single glance. Catherine's hand tightened on his. "I trust you," Catherine said quietly. "If you think we should stay, we'll stay." Thomas closed his eyes, When he opened them, they were filled with anguish. I don't know what to do. I prayed for guidance, but I don't hear anything. I'm just lost. It was the first time Mara had seen him vulnerable, the fierce protector stripped down to a terrified man trying to save his family. Mr. Hale, she said gently. Thomas, I can't make this decision for you, but I can tell you what I know. I've worked in conflict zones. I've seen what happens when violence comes to places like this. And I've learned that survival isn't about faith or strength or righteousness. It's about making the hard choice to move when staying feels safer, to run when fighting feels braver, to trust strangers when trust feels impossible. And you think we should evacuate? I think you should have evacuated a week ago. But yes, if that convoy arrives, you should be on it. Thomas looked at Catherine again. She nodded slightly. All right, he said. We'll go. But if anything happens to her or the baby, I know, Mara said. It'll be on me. She left them alone, hoping she'd made the right call, hoping the convoy would arrive in time, hoping that for once the world would be kind enough to let hope matter. And the next 3 days were tense and strange. The epidemic had burned out, leaving the compound quiet and subdued. People moved through their routines mechanically, packing essential supplies, preparing for evacuation, watching the horizon for signs of either salvation or destruction. Mara continued her medical rounds, but her mind was elsewhere. She found herself thinking about escape routes, defensive positions, how long they could hold out if the worst happened. It was a mental exercise she'd done a dozen times in other places, the cold calculus of survival when systems failed and civilization peeled away. On the morning of the fourth day, Eleanor called an emergency meeting in the dining hall. The entire community gathered, faces anxious, children clinging to their mothers. The convoy has been delayed, Eleanor announced. Her voice was steady, but Mara could see the strain around her eyes. Mechanical problems. They're working on repairs, but it will be at least another 2 days before they can reach us. A murmur of fear ran through the crowd. In the meantime, Eleanor continued, we will maintain order. We will continue our daily routines. We will not give in to panic. We've survived worse than this, and we'll survive this too. Someone in the back called out, what if they come before the convoy? Eleanor was silent for a moment. Then she said simply, then we'll deal with it together, with faith and discipline and courage. It was the kind of answer that sounded reassuring but meant nothing, and everyone in the room knew it, but it was all Eleanor had to give. As the meeting dispersed, Mara pulled Eleanor aside. We need a real plan. I'm open to suggestions. If they come, we can't fight them. We don't have the weapons or the training, so we need to hide what's valuable. People, supplies, anything they might want. Create the appearance that we've already been looted. Make ourselves not worth the trouble. Eleanor considered this. Where would we hide people? The old well we sealed during the cholera outbreak. It's dry, deep enough for several people. We could lower them down, cover the entrance. Mara hesitated. It's not perfect, but it's something. And if they find them, then at least we tried. Mara met Eleanor's eyes. Because doing nothing guarantees the worst outcome. Eleanor nodded slowly. All right, start preparations, but quietly. I don't want to create more fear than we already have. That night, Mara couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed listening to the sounds of the compound settling into an uneasy rest, and thought about all the ways this could go wrong. Around 2 a.m, she heard shouting. She was out of bed and dressed in seconds, grabbing her medical bag purely out of instinct. Outside, people were running toward the main gate. She followed, her heart pounding. At the gate, she found Thomas Hale standing with one of the young guards. Both were staring out into the darkness beyond the compound. What is it? Mara asked. Thomas pointed. In the distance, maybe 5 miles away, she could see fires. Not campfires. Building fires. The kind of fires that came from destruction. They're burning the villages, Thomas said quietly. They're coming. Mara looked at the fires, at the smoke rising black against the stars, and felt the last of her hope evaporate. Eleanor arrived, moving quickly despite the hour. She took in the scene with one sweeping glance. Sound the alarm, she said. Get everyone to the dining hall. Now. Within minutes, the entire compound was awake and assembled. Eleanor stood before them, small and fierce and absolutely in control. Mabuto's forces are approaching, she said. We have limited time to prepare. Dr. Vance has a plan to hide our most vulnerable residents. We're going to implement it immediately. She divided them into groups with ruthless efficiency. Able-bodied adults would create the appearance of an already looted mission. Women and children would hide in the sealed well. A small group would remain visible to deal with whoever came, buying time and misdirection. Who stays visible? Someone asked. Eleanor's face was grim. I will. And any volunteers? Thomas stepped forward. I'll stay. They need to see a man here, someone who looks like they're in charge. Thomas, Catherine began, but he shook his head. You're going in the well, with the baby. That's not negotiable. He turned to Mara. You'll protect her. With my life, Mara said, and meant it. Others volunteered, 3 of the older women, tough and weathered from years of survival. The young guards, though Mara suspected they'd be more liability than help. And to Mara's surprise, Sarah. You should hide, Mara told her. You and Daniel. Daniel will hide, Sarah said firmly. But Eleanor needs help, and I'm not leaving her alone. As the groups dispersed to their tasks, Mara gathered the women and children who would hide. Catherine was among them, moving slowly, her face pale with fear and exhaustion. Can you climb down a ladder? Mara asked her. I'll manage, Catherine said. Then quieter. I have to. They moved through the darkness to the sealed well. Mara and 2 other women removed the covering, revealing the dark shaft below. A rope ladder hung down into the depths. How long will we be down there? A woman asked. I don't know, Mara said honestly. Until it's safe. Could be hours. Could be longer. They descended one by one. Mothers with babies, children clinging to each other, elderly women who'd survived too much already. Mara went last, helping lower supplies, water, food, blankets, her medical bag. At the bottom, the well was cramped and dark and smelled of old earth. Mara could hear children crying quietly, mothers whispering reassurance, the scared breathing of people waiting for unknown danger. Catherine sat against the wall, her hands on her belly. The baby's moving a lot, she said, like they know something's wrong. Babies are smart that way, Mara said, trying to keep her voice light. Just breathe, stay calm, we'll get through this. She hoped that was true. Above them, someone pulled the cover back over the well opening. The darkness became absolute. All they could do now was wait. Time lost meaning in the darkness. Mara checked her watch periodically. 3 a.m., 4 a.m., 5 a.m. Dawn came somewhere above them, but down in the well it stayed night. Around 6, they heard the first sounds of vehicles, engines, shouting, the unmistakable noise of armed men moving through the compound. The women and children went absolutely silent. Even the babies seemed to understand, making no sound. Mara held her breath, listening. Above she could hear Eleanor's voice, calm and authoritative. Then a man's voice, rough and aggressive. More shouting, the sound of something breaking. Catherine grabbed Mara's arm, her grip painfully tight. Thomas is up there, she whispered. I know, he'll be fine. He knows what he's doing. Mara had no idea if that was true, but Catherine needed to hear it. The voices continued. Then suddenly, a gunshot. Catherine made a sound like a wounded animal. Around them, women gasped, children whimpered. Quiet, Mara hissed. Everyone quiet, not a sound. More gunshots, screaming, the sounds of violence unleashed. And then, worse than any of it, silence. They waited in that terrible silence, not knowing who had died, who had survived, what was happening above. Minutes stretched into hours. Children fell into exhausted sleep. Women prayed or wept quietly or simply stared into darkness. Catherine's breathing grew labored. Mara moved closer, feeling her forehead. Hot, too hot. Catherine, talk to me. I don't feel good, Catherine whispered. My head hurts and my stomach. Mara's blood ran cold. She couldn't check blood pressure, couldn't see Catherine's face properly, couldn't do any of the things she needed to do, but she could feel the tension in Catherine's body, could hear the pain in her voice. Just breathe, Mara said. Slow, deep breaths. We're going to be fine. But they weren't fine, because even in the darkness, Mara could feel it. That shift from precarious stability to crisis, from manageable to catastrophic. And somewhere above them, in a world of violence and chaos, the people who could help them were gone. Catherine's contractions started at hour 7. Mara felt them through the darkness, the way Catherine's body went rigid, the sharp intake of breath, the hand that gripped Mara's arm with sudden, desperate strength. "No," Catherine whispered. "No, not now. Please, not now." But biology didn't negotiate. Mara had learned that lesson in a dozen crisis situations across 3 continents. The body did what it needed to do, regardless of circumstance, regardless of safety, regardless of whether anyone was ready. "How far apart?" Mara asked quietly, keeping her voice low enough that only Catherine could hear. "I don't... Maybe 10 minutes? I thought it was just stress, just fear, but it's getting worse." Mara pressed her fingers against Catherine's wrist, counting the pulse. Fast. Too fast. She touched Catherine's forehead again, still hot, possibly hotter than before. In the absolute darkness of the well, she couldn't see Catherine's face, couldn't check for swelling or visual disturbances, couldn't do any proper assessment. "Listen to me," Mara said, her mouth close to Catherine's ear. "Your blood pressure is probably spiking. The stress, the fear, being down here, it's all triggering what we were trying to prevent. I need you to stay as calm as possible. Slow your breathing. Focus on relaxing between contractions." "Thomas," Catherine breathed, "that gunshot, was it—" "We don't know anything yet. Don't think about it. Just focus on breathing." Around them, other women had noticed Catherine's distress. A hand reached out in the darkness. One of the older women, someone named Ruth, who'd been at the mission for years. "The baby's coming?" Ruth whispered. "Maybe. I don't know yet. Could be false labor triggered by stress." But Mara didn't believe that, and she could tell Ruth didn't either. Another contraction hit. Catherine bit down on her own hand to keep from crying out, her body shaking with the effort of staying silent. Above them, they could still hear movement, boots on packed earth, voices speaking in a language Mara didn't recognize, the occasional crash of something being destroyed. When the contraction passed, Catherine was crying silently, tears running down her face in the darkness. "I can't do this here. I can't have my baby in a hole in the ground while people are dying up there." "You can," Mara said firmly. "You will, because you don't have a choice, and neither do I. So we're going to do this together, and we're going to get through it. You don't understand. I've waited 15 years for this baby. 3 miscarriages. Doctors told me it would never happen, and now—" Her voice broke. "Now I'm going to lose everything. The baby, Thomas, everything." Mara wanted to offer comfort, to lie and say everything would be fine. But she'd never been good at lying, and she respected Catherine too much to start now. "You might," Mara said quietly. "I won't pretend otherwise. But you might not. And until we know for certain, we fight for the possibility that you won't. Understood?" Catherine nodded in the darkness, a movement Mara felt rather than saw. The contractions continued, irregular at first, then settling into a pattern. 20 minutes apart. 15. 12. Mara tracked them by her watch, the luminous dial providing the only light in their underground prison. She had her medical bag, but in this darkness, with no space, no sterility, no backup, most of her equipment was useless. Around them, the other women and children had fallen into an exhausted stupor. Some slept despite the fear. Others sat in silent vigilance, listening to the sounds from above. A young mother named Grace held her infant son, rocking him mechanically, her eyes wide and unseeing in the dark. Sarah sat near the ladder, her son Daniel asleep against her shoulder. She'd been counting the hours since they'd descended, keeping track with small rocks she couldn't see but could feel. 9 hours? She whispered to no one in particular. 9 hours down here. How much water do we have left? Mara asked. Maybe half. If we ration carefully another day. Maybe 2. Mara did the math. If they were trapped down here for 2 days, Catherine would have the baby in these conditions. If Catherine's blood pressure continued to spike, she could seize, stroke, hemorrhage, and Mara would be helpless to do anything but watch. Another contraction gripped Catherine. This one was stronger, lasting nearly a minute. Catherine's breathing became ragged, panicked. Breathe, Mara commanded. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Don't hold your breath. Breathe through it. It hurts, Catherine gasped. It hurts so much. I know, but pain means your body is working. It means the baby is coming whether we're ready or not. Mara kept her voice steady, authoritative, the voice she used in emergency rooms when everything was falling apart, and people needed someone to sound like they knew what they were doing. You're strong, Catherine. Stronger than you think. You're going to do this. When the contraction ended, Catherine slumped against the wall, exhausted. Tell me something, she whispered. Tell me about anything. I need to think about something other than what's happening. Mara hesitated, then began to talk. She told Catherine about her first assignment out of medical school, a field hospital in a conflict zone she couldn't name, where she'd learned to perform surgery by lamplight and treat wounds that textbooks said were unsurvivable. She talked about a girl, maybe 8 years old, who'd stepped on a landmine and lost her leg, but who'd somehow maintained a smile that could light up a room. She described the exhaustion, the fear, the moments of startling beauty that punctuated the horror, a sunset over bombed-out buildings, a child's laughter echoing through ruins, the fierce determination of people who refused to give up even when giving up made perfect sense. Catherine listened, her breathing slowly steadying. Why do you do it? She asked. Why work in places like this? Because someone has to, and because I'm good at it. Mara paused, and because the alternative, sitting somewhere safe while people suffer, that felt worse than any danger I might face. You're brave. I'm practical. There's a difference. No, Catherine said softly. You're brave. You just don't want to admit it. Before Mara could respond, they heard a new sound from above, voices closer than before. Then footsteps, heavy boots walking directly over their hiding place. Everyone in the well froze. Mara put her hand over Catherine's mouth, a gentle warning to stay absolutely silent. The footsteps paused. More voices, an argument of some kind. Then the scraping sound of something being dragged across the ground, directly over the well's cover. They were putting something on top of it, blocking them in. Sarah made a small, frightened sound. Ruth began to pray under her breath. A child started to cry, and her mother quickly muffled the sound. The footsteps moved away. Silence returned, but it was different now. Heavier, more final. They weren't just hiding anymore. They were trapped. What does that mean? Grace whispered. Mara didn't answer immediately. She was calculating airflow, oxygen consumption, how long they could survive in a sealed space. The well was deep but not enormous. 20-some people breathing in a confined area, no ventilation. It means we have maybe 24 hours before oxygen becomes a problem, Mara said quietly. Less if anyone panics and starts hyperventilating. So we're going to suffocate down here? Sarah's voice was tight with fear. Not if someone removes whatever they put on top. The convoy, Eleanor, whoever survives up there, they'll find us. And if no one survives? Mara didn't have an answer for that. Catherine's next contraction came harder and faster, 8 minutes since the last one. The labor was progressing, and there was nothing Mara could do to slow it down. She shifted position, trying to assess Catherine's condition by touch alone. The cervix was dilating. She could tell by how Catherine's body was changing, the pressure increasing, the contractions intensifying. How long? Catherine gasped when she could speak again. Hours still. First babies take time, even under normal circumstances. Mara tried to sound reassuring. We've got time. But they didn't have time. Not really. Because even if Catherine delivered successfully, they still had to survive whatever was happening above them. They still had to get out of this hole. And Mara had no idea how that was going to happen. The hours crawled past. Catherine labored in the darkness, trying desperately to stay quiet even as the pain intensified. Mara coached her through each contraction, monitored her as best she could, and tried not to think about all the things that could go wrong. Around hour 12, they heard new sounds from above. More vehicles, more voices, but these voices were different, speaking English, barking orders with military precision. The convoy, someone breathed. It's the convoy. Hope surged through the well like electricity. People stirred, sitting up, listening intently. Then came the sounds of fighting, gunfire, shouting, explosions that made the earth around them shake. The battle raged for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Then, gradually, the sounds faded. Silence returned. They waited, barely breathing, for some sign of who had won. The scraping sound came first, whatever had been placed on the well being dragged away. Then voices, speaking English. "Over here. I found something." "Is it a well?" "Sealed up. Recent by the looks of it." "Check it. Could be supplies." The cover was pulled away. Light flooded down into the well, blinding after so many hours of darkness. Mara shielded her eyes, squinting up at the opening. A face appeared above, silhouetted against the sky. A soldier in uniform, young and scared-looking. "Jesus Christ," the soldier breathed. "There's people down here. We need help." Within minutes, they were being pulled up, women and children first, handed up the ladder or hauled up on ropes. Mara stayed at the bottom, helping lift the younger children, making sure everyone got out safely. Catherine was in the middle of a contraction and couldn't move. "You have to go," Mara told Grace, who was hesitating. "Get your son up there. We'll follow." When only Mara and Catherine remained, Catherine's contraction finally eased enough for her to move. But when she tried to stand, her legs gave out. "I can't," she gasped. "I can't climb. The baby—" "We'll get you up," Mara called up to the soldiers. "I need a rope and a harness. The woman down here is in active labor. We have to lift her out." They rigged something quickly. Military efficiency translating to practical problem-solving. Catherine was strapped into a makeshift harness and pulled up carefully, Mara guiding her from below. When Catherine was safely at the top, Mara climbed the ladder, her muscles screaming after so many hours in cramped darkness. She emerged into late afternoon sunlight. The compound was devastated. Buildings burned, supplies scattered, everything that could be destroyed. But the convoy was here, a dozen vehicles with armed escorts, and the women and children from the well were being tended to by medics. Mara looked around frantically for Eleanor, for Thomas, for any of the people who'd stayed above. A medic approached her, a woman in her 30s with kind eyes and professional efficiency. "You're the doctor?" "Yes. Where are the people who were here, the ones who stayed topside?" The medic's expression shifted. "Come with me." She led Mara to one of the buildings that was still standing, the medical clinic, though it had been ransacked. Inside, laid out on makeshift stretchers, were the bodies. Eleanor lay with her eyes closed, her face peaceful despite the bullet wound in her chest. Sarah beside her, her hand still reaching toward Eleanor as if she'd died trying to help. The two young guards, both shot execution style. Two of the older women who'd volunteered to stay. And Thomas. He'd been shot multiple times, his body bearing the marks of someone who'd fought back. His hands were bloody, one clutching a broken piece of wood he'd apparently used as a weapon. He'd died defending the compound, defending the illusion that there was nothing here worth taking. Mara stood over his body, feeling nothing and everything at once. He'd been stubborn, difficult, blinded by beliefs that sometimes endangered his family. But he'd been brave. In the end, he'd been unbelievably brave. "The woman in labor," Mara said, her voice mechanical. "Is she his wife?" "I don't know. But she's asking for him." Mara closed her eyes briefly. Then she turned and walked back outside, toward where Catherine was lying on a blanket, surrounded by medics who clearly had no idea what to do with a woman in advanced labor. Catherine saw Mara's face and knew immediately. "No," she whispered. "No, please." Mara knelt beside her, taking her hand. "I'm so sorry, Catherine. Thomas, he didn't make it. They shot him, but he died protecting everyone. He died a hero." Catherine's face crumpled. She tried to speak but couldn't. The grief was too big, too overwhelming. And then another contraction hit, and grief had to wait because the baby wasn't waiting for anything. "I need space," Mara told the medics. "Clean water, sterile supplies, anything you have. This baby is coming now." They worked quickly, setting up a makeshift delivery area. The convoy's medical supplies were far better than what the mission had. Proper instruments, medications, even a portable oxygen tank. It still wasn't a hospital, but it was better than a dark well. Catherine labored through her grief, crying between contractions, calling for Thomas, begging him to come back. Mara stayed at her side, monitoring, encouraging, preparing for the delivery that was inevitable now. He wanted this baby so much, Catherine sobbed. 15 years we waited, and now he'll never— A contraction cut off her words. He knew you were pregnant, Mara said firmly. He knew he was going to be a father, and he died making sure you and the baby had a chance to survive. That meant something to him, Catherine. Don't let that sacrifice be for nothing. The words were harsh, but they worked. Catherine's grief hardened into something more focused. Determination mixed with rage, mixed with desperate love for the child she hadn't even met yet. The delivery took 3 more hours. Catherine pushed with strength that seemed impossible for someone who'd just lost everything. Mara coached her through it, delivering the baby with steady hands despite her own exhaustion. The child emerged screaming, a healthy, furious sound that filled the devastated compound with something that sounded almost like hope. A girl, pink and perfect, with a full head of dark hair and her father's strong features. You have a daughter, Mara said, placing the baby on Catherine's chest. She's beautiful. Catherine looked down at her daughter, and her face transformed. The grief was still there, but alongside it was wonder, fierce protective love, the overwhelming reality of new life in the middle of so much death. Emma, Catherine whispered. I want to name her Emma, after the little girl who survived the epidemic, the one who lived when everyone thought she'd die. Mara thought of the first Emma, who was somewhere among the survivors who'd beaten cholera against the odds. It seemed fitting. Emma is a good name, Mara said softly. She finished the delivery, checking Catherine for complications, monitoring the baby, doing all the routine things that felt surreal in these circumstances. Catherine and Emma were both stable, both surviving, both somehow okay despite everything that had happened. As Mara worked, the convoy commander approached, a grizzled man in his 50s with the bearing of someone who'd seen too many situations like this. Dr. Vance, he said, I'm Colonel Mensah. I need to brief you on the situation. Mara stepped away from Catherine, letting one of the medics take over. She followed the colonel to a quieter area. Mabuto's forces hit the compound approximately 14 hours ago, Mensah said. They killed everyone who resisted, looted what supplies they could carry, and moved on. We encountered them about 10 miles south, engaged, and drove them back. But the fight scattered them. Some retreated deeper into the bush. Others— He paused. Others are regrouping. We think they'll make another attempt to take this area. So we're not safe here. No one's safe here. We're evacuating everyone, survivors from the mission, people from the surrounding villages, anyone who wants to leave. We have room for maybe 200 people if we pack them tight. When do we leave? Dawn tomorrow. We need to bury the dead first and secure the perimeter for the night. Mensah looked at her closely. I understand you delivered a baby just now. Can the mother travel? She doesn't have a choice, does she? No, ma'am. None of us do. That night they held a brief ceremony for the dead. No markers, no elaborate ritual, just a mass grave dug quickly and efficiently, bodies wrapped in whatever cloth could be found. Eleanor, Thomas, Sarah, the guards, the volunteers, all buried together in the compound they'd tried to protect. Mara stood at the graveside with the other survivors, watching as the soldiers filled in the earth. Catherine stood beside her, holding baby Emma, tears running silently down her face. He should be here, Catherine whispered. He should be holding his daughter. I know. What am I supposed to do now? How am I supposed to raise her alone? Mara didn't have an answer. She'd delivered dozens of babies in crisis situations, but she'd never been good at the aftermath, the grief, the trauma, the impossible question of how people rebuilt their lives after everything fell apart. You survive, Mara said finally. One day at a time, you survive, and you make sure she knows her father died protecting her, that his last act was making sure she had a chance at life. Catherine nodded, but Mara could see the devastation in her eyes. Thomas's death had broken something in her that might never fully heal. As darkness fell, the survivors gathered in one of the remaining intact buildings. The convoy soldiers posted guards, set up a defensive perimeter, and tried to create some illusion of safety. But everyone knew it was thin comfort. They were still in danger. They were still exposed. And morning was a long time away. Mara found a corner where she could sit with her back against a wall and her medical bag within reach. She was exhausted beyond anything she'd felt in years, but sleep seemed impossible. Her mind kept replaying the day, the hours in the well, Catherine's labor, the bodies in the clinic, Eleanor's peaceful face in death. Grace sat down beside her, her infant son sleeping against her chest. "Thank you," Grace said quietly, "for getting us out, for keeping us alive." "I didn't do much. You did everything. When people were panicking, you stayed calm. When Catherine was having the baby, you knew what to do. You saved us." Mara shook her head. "Eleanor saved you. Thomas saved you. They stayed up here and died so the rest of you could hide. I just improvised." Eleanor was brave, but she was also wrong about a lot of things. Grace's voice was soft but firm. She believed order and discipline could protect us from everything, that if we just followed the rules and maintained faith, we'd be safe. But that's not how the world works. Sometimes the world doesn't care about rules or faith or how hard you try. What do you think protects people? Grace looked down at her sleeping son. Other people. That's it. People who refuse to give up, who fight for each other, who do impossible things because the alternative is worse. Like you. Before Mara could respond, a commotion erupted outside. Shouting, running footsteps, the unmistakable sound of gunfire. "Everyone down!" a soldier yelled. "We're under attack!" The building erupted into chaos. Women grabbed children, people scrambled for cover, soldiers took up defensive positions. Mara threw herself over Catherine and the baby, shielding them with her body. The gunfire was intense but brief. Then shouting in that unfamiliar language, and the sound of the soldiers calling back. Negotiating. The shooting stopped. Colonel Mensah burst into the building, his face grim. "They have us surrounded. Approximately 50 fighters, well armed, blocking all the exit routes. They're demanding we surrender." "What happens if we surrender?" Mara asked. "Nothing good." Mensah's voice was flat. "They'll take the women, conscript anyone useful, kill the rest. Standard practice for Mobutu's forces." "And if we fight?" "We're outnumbered 3-1. We might hold them off until dawn, but we'll take casualties. Heavy casualties." He looked around at the frightened faces. "I need to make a decision. Fight or surrender. And I need to make it now." Mara stood up, her mind racing. "What do they want? What are they actually demanding?" "Supplies, weapons, medical equipment." Mensah hesitated. "And the doctor. They're demanding the doctor." The room went silent. Everyone looked at Mara. "Why me specifically?" Mara asked, though she already knew the answer. "One of their commanders was injured in the earlier fight. He's dying. They need someone who can save him. And if I go, what happens to everyone else? They let the convoy leave. That's what they're offering. 1 life for 200. Catherine made a small, desperate sound. Grace put her hand over her mouth, stifling a protest. Ruth began praying aloud, her voice shaking. Mara looked at Mensah. "Do you believe them? Will they actually let people go?" "I don't know, maybe. Or maybe they'll kill everyone anyway once they have what they want." His expression was tortured. "I can't order you to do this, Dr. Vance. This isn't military. You're a civilian. But if I don't go, we all die anyway in the fighting." "Most likely, yes." Mara thought about all the desperate situations she'd faced, all the impossible choices she'd made in field hospitals, in refugee camps, and war zones. She'd always believed there were lines she wouldn't cross, principles she wouldn't compromise. But standing here, looking at 200 terrified faces, she realized principles were a luxury she couldn't afford. "I'll go," she said quietly, "but I have conditions." "What conditions?" "They let every single person on this convoy leave. No exceptions. No taking women or conscripting men. Everyone walks away free." Mara's voice hardened. "And they give their word, whatever that's worth, that they won't pursue or attack the convoy again." "I'll relay the terms." Mensah started to leave, then turned back. "This is extraordinarily brave, Dr. Vance. What you're doing." "It's not brave. It's just the only choice that makes sense." Mara looked at Catherine, who was sobbing quietly, clutching Emma. "Take care of them. Make sure Catherine and the baby get somewhere safe. Somewhere with proper medical care." "I will." "You have my word." Mensah left to negotiate. The women in the room surrounded Mara, some crying, some thanking her, some just staring in disbelief. Catherine pushed through to her, holding Emma with one arm and grabbing Mara's hand with the other. "Don't do this," Catherine begged. "Please. You saved my life. You saved my daughter. I can't let you. You're not letting me do anything. This is my choice." Mara gently touched Emma's tiny hand. "She deserves a chance to grow up, Catherine. So do all these children. If this is what it costs, then it's a price I'm willing to pay." "But what about you? What happens to you?" Mara didn't answer because she didn't know. She'd treated enemy combatants before, worked in hostile conditions, operated under threat. Sometimes it worked out, sometimes it didn't. There was no predicting which this would be. Mensah returned. "They've agreed to your terms. Everyone leaves at first light, but you go now. They want you immediately." "Give me 5 minutes." Mara gathered her medical supplies, taking inventory of what she had. Not much, but maybe enough to save one man's life, if he was savable. She checked her instruments, her medications, the basic emergency equipment that had sustained her through a dozen crisis situations. Sarah's son Daniel appeared beside her, his small face serious. "Are you coming back?" he asked. Mara knelt down to his level. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I need you to be brave, okay? Take care of your mama for me." "Mama's dead," Daniel said matter-of-factly. "The bad men killed her." The words hit Mara like a physical blow. She'd been so focused on the immediate crisis that she hadn't processed what Daniel had lost. Sarah, who'd been kind and hopeful and determined to help Eleanor even when it meant risking her own life. "I'm sorry," Mara said, her voice breaking slightly. "Your mama was very brave, and she loved you so much." "I know." Daniel threw his arms around Mara's neck in a fierce hug. "Be brave too." Mara held him for a moment, then gently detached herself. She couldn't afford to feel this right now. Couldn't afford to let the emotion overwhelm her. She had to stay functional, stay focused, stay sharp. Colonel Mensah led her outside. The compound was lit by torches and vehicle headlights, creating harsh shadows. In the darkness beyond the perimeter, she could see movement, soldiers, fighters, armed men waiting. "Last chance to change your mind," Mensah said quietly. "No, it's not." Mara hefted her medical bag. "Make sure everyone gets out. That's all I ask." "You have my word." Mara walked toward the perimeter, toward the darkness where the enemy waited. Behind her, she could hear crying, people calling her name, begging her not to go. She didn't turn around. If she looked back, she might not have the strength to keep walking. At the edge of the light, a figure emerged, a man in military fatigues carrying an assault rifle. He looked her up and down, then gestured for her to follow. "You're the doctor?" he asked in accented English. "I am." "You will save Commander Mabuto. If he dies, you die. Understand?" "I understand, but I need to know what I'm treating. What are his injuries?" "Bullet wound, chest. He's been bleeding for hours." Mara's stomach sank. A chest wound bleeding for hours. The chances of survival were slim even in a fully equipped hospital. Out here, with limited supplies and no backup, it was nearly impossible. But she'd agreed to try, and she always kept her agreements. She followed the man into the darkness, leaving the compound and its survivors behind. The walk took perhaps 20 minutes, through rough terrain that Mara navigated more by feel than sight. Other fighters joined them, forming a loose escort. No one spoke. The only sounds were boots on hard ground and the distant calls of night birds. They arrived at what looked like a temporary camp, vehicles arranged in a defensive circle, men moving about with practiced efficiency, the smell of smoke and unwashed bodies heavy in the air. In the center, under a canvas awning, lay the commander. Mabuto was younger than Mara had expected, maybe 40, with the hard face of someone who'd spent years fighting. He lay on a makeshift cot, his breathing labored, his chest wrapped in blood-soaked bandages. Around him stood armed guards and what looked like lieutenants, all watching Mara with hostile suspicion. She set down her medical bag and approached the cot. "I need light, good light, and clean water, and space. Everyone except 2 assistants needs to step back." "You don't give orders here," one of the lieutenants said. "If you want him to live, I do." Mara met his eyes without flinching. "I can't work with people hovering. I can't assess him properly in the dark, and I can't maintain sterile conditions without clean water. So either give me what I need or shoot me now and let him die. Your choice." There was a long, tense silence. Then Mabuto himself spoke, his voice weak but authoritative. "Give her what she asks for. But if you try anything—" "I'm a doctor," Mara interrupted. "My job is to save lives. That includes yours. Now let me work." They brought lamps, water, a space cleared of observers, except for two young men who looked terrified to be chosen as assistants. Mara unwrapped the bandages carefully, revealing the wound beneath. The bullet had entered below the collarbone, angling downward. Mara did a quick assessment, checking for exit wound, palpating for broken ribs, listening to breath sounds. The right lung was compromised, filling with blood. No exit wound meant the bullet was still inside, possibly lodged near the spine or major vessels. This was a surgery that required a trauma team, imaging, proper equipment. But Mara had none of that. She had field instruments, local anesthetic, her hands, and whatever skills she could muster. "This is going to hurt," she told Mabuto. "I don't have enough anesthetic to knock you out completely. You'll feel some of it. Then I'll feel it." His eyes focused on her with frightening intensity. "Just don't let me die." "I'll do my best, that's all I can promise. All I can—" Mara worked through the night, her hands steady despite the exhaustion and fear. She opened the wound, explored the damage, found the bullet lodged against the fourth rib. Removing it meant risking massive hemorrhage. Leaving it meant certain infection and death. She removed it. Mabuto screamed once, a raw sound that echoed through the camp. Then he bit down on the leather strap someone had given him and endured the rest in silence. Mara worked methodically, controlling bleeding, debriding damaged tissue, closing layers with precise sutures. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't textbook, but it was functional. Dawn was breaking by the time she finished. Mabuto was still alive, his breathing easier, his color slightly better. Mara had done everything medically possible. Whether it would be enough was now up to biology and luck. She bandaged the wound with clean dressings, administered antibiotics from her dwindling supply, and set up the IV line for fluids. "He needs rest," she told the lieutenants who'd been watching. "No moving him. Keep him hydrated. Change the dressings twice daily. If he develops fever, infection, any sign of complications, I'll need to reassess." "You're not leaving," one of them said. "I didn't expect to." Mara was too tired to be afraid anymore. "But you promised to let the convoy go. Dawn has come. Keep your word." "The convoy left an hour ago," a voice said behind her. Mara turned. In the growing light, she could see the camp more clearly now. The weapons, the supplies, the casual brutality of men who'd lived by violence for so long they'd forgotten any other way. "They're gone?" Mara asked. "All of them. Women, children, soldiers. We watched them drive away." The speaker was an older man, scarred and weathered. "We keep our agreements, Doctor, even when it costs us." "Then I've done what I promised. I saved your commander." "You did, which is why you're still alive." The man studied her with something that might have been respect. "What you did, walking out here, putting yourself in our hands, that took courage. It took desperation. There's often not much difference between the two." He gestured to one of the younger fighters. "Show her where she can rest. Give her food and water. She's earned that much." They led Mara to a tent at the edge of the camp, little more than canvas stretched over poles. Inside was a sleeping mat, a jug of water, and nothing else. She collapsed onto the mat, every muscle screaming, and fell immediately into a sleep so deep it felt like drowning. When Mara woke, the sun was high and merciless, turning the tent into an oven. Her mouth tasted like copper and dust. Her body ached in places she'd forgotten could ache, and for a disorienting moment she had no idea where she was. Then memory crashed back. The surgery, Mabuto's ragged breathing, the blood on her hands that she could still feel even though she'd scrubbed them clean. She sat up slowly, taking inventory. Her medical bag sat in the corner, apparently untouched. The water jug was half empty. She must have drunk from it during the night without fully waking. Outside, she could hear voices, the clank of metal on metal, the rumble of vehicle engines. A shadow fell across the tent opening. The scarred man from earlier ducked inside, carrying a tin plate with what looked like rice and some kind of stewed meat. "You need to eat," he said, setting the plate down beside her. Commander wants to see you when you're ready. Mara's stomach clenched. Is he worse? He's awake, asking for you. The man's expression was unreadable. That's a good sign, yes, that he's awake? It means he survived the surgery. Whether he'll survive the next few days depends on whether infection sets in. Mara picked up the plate, suddenly ravenous. The food was simple but hot, and she ate quickly, mechanically. How long was I asleep? 6 hours, maybe 7. It's past noon now. 6 hours. The convoy would be far away by now, hopefully approaching safer territory. Catherine and baby Emma, Grace and her son, little Daniel, who'd lost his mother, all of them moving towards something that resembled safety, while Mara sat in a warlord's camp eating rice and trying not to think about what came next. What's your name? She asked the scarred man. He looked surprised by the question. Kofi. I'm Mara. I know, everyone knows who you are, the doctor who walked into the lion's den to save a man she should hate. Kofi squatted down, his joints cracking. Why did you do it? Really? Not the noble reason you told your people. The real reason. Mara considered lying, offering some sanitized version that would sound better. But she was too tired for pretense. Because I couldn't watch 200 people die in a firefight, and because saving lives is what I do, regardless of whose life it is. And because, she paused, surprised by her own honesty. Because I've been in enough desperate situations to know that sometimes the only power you have is the power to choose how you lose. I chose to lose on my terms. Kofi nodded slowly. That's more honest than I expected. Come. The commander is waiting. Mabuto had been moved to a larger tent, this one with actual cots and equipment that looked looted from various medical facilities. He lay propped up on pillows, his chest heavily bandaged, his face gray with pain but alert. 2 armed guards stood watch, their rifles held with casual readiness. Mara approached the cot, her professional instincts taking over. I need to check your vitals and examine the wound. The guards can stay, but they need to give me space to work. Always giving orders, Mabuto said, but there was something almost like amusement in his voice. Kofi was right about you. You have steel in your spine. I have a job to do. Steel is optional, but helpful. Mara pulled out her stethoscope. How's your pain level, 1 to 10? 7, maybe 8 when I breathe deep. That's normal after this kind of trauma. I'll give you something for it, but I need to examine you first. She listened to his chest, checking lung sounds, heart rate, any sign of complications. The right lung was still compromised but improving. No signs of pneumothorax or hemothorax. The heart rhythm was regular. Your body is doing what it should. The real danger now is infection. If the wound shows any signs, increased redness, heat, discharge, fever, I need to know immediately. And if there is infection, then I'll treat it aggressively. But you need to understand my antibiotic supply is limited. If we burn through it fighting infection and something else happens, someone else gets injured. Mara met his eyes directly. I'll have nothing left. Are you asking me to ration medical care in my own camp? I'm asking you to understand the reality of finite resources. It's the same conversation I had with the mission administrator before your people killed her. The tent went silent. The guards tensed, fingers tightening on their weapons. Mabuto's expression darkened. You think I wanted that? He said quietly. You think I ordered the execution of unarmed women? I think you lead men who did it. Whether you ordered it specifically or just created an environment where it was acceptable, the result is the same. People are dead. People die in war. That's the nature of conflict. This wasn't war. It was a massacre. Mara's voice was cold, controlled. But you're right about one thing. People do die. And if you die from infection because we didn't have antibiotics left, that'll just be one more death in a long list. So we're going to be smart about resources. Understood? Mabuto stared at her for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he laughed. A short, pained sound that made him wince and press his hand to his bandaged chest. You have no fear of me at all, do you? Fear doesn't change medical facts. You can shoot me or you can let me do my job. But you can't intimidate biology into behaving differently. I could make you regret that attitude. You could try. Mara began unwrapping his bandages. But then you'd be back to having no doctor, a serious wound, and a very uncertain prognosis. Your choice. He watched her work, his face unreadable. When she'd finished examining the wound, which looked good, all things considered, no signs of infection yet, and applied fresh bandages, he spoke again. Kofi said you told him you chose how to lose. That's an interesting philosophy for a healer. It's a realistic one. I've worked in places where winning wasn't an option, where the best you could hope for was to lose as little as possible. Mara packed her supplies. The mission was one of those places. Limited resources, impossible odds, leadership that believed conviction could substitute for infrastructure. It was failing long before your people showed up. You just accelerated the inevitable. And yet you stayed. You could have evacuated with the first convoy, the one that was supposed to arrive days ago, but you stayed. Someone had to. There were patients who needed care. The woman who had the baby, she was one of them? Mara's hand stilled. Yes. And the baby survived? She did. A girl, born in the darkness while your forces burned everything above us. She survived because her mother was strong and because I had just enough equipment to improvise. Mara met his eyes. Her father didn't survive. He was one of the people your men shot. Mabuto's expression shifted slightly. Not quite regret, but something adjacent to it. War makes orphans and widows. I didn't invent that truth. No, but you contributed to it. Mara stood. I'll check on you again this evening. Try to rest. Drink water. If you feel feverish, send for me immediately. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. Why save me? You said it was to protect the convoy, but they're gone now. You could have let me die on that table, claimed the wound was too severe. No one would have questioned it. Mara looked back at him. Because I'm a doctor. That's not just what I do. It's who I am. And the moment I start choosing which lives matter based on whether I approve of the person's choices, I stop being a doctor and become something else. Something I don't want to be. Even if the person whose life you save has caused tremendous suffering? Even then, the medical oath doesn't have exceptions for difficult patients. She paused. But don't mistake professional obligation for forgiveness. I'll keep you alive because that's my job. That doesn't mean I've absolved you of anything. She left before he could respond. Outside, the camp was alive with activity. Men cleaned weapons, repaired vehicles, moved supplies. They watched Mara as she walked past, their expressions ranging from curiosity to hostility to something that might have been respect. She kept her head up, her pace steady, refusing to show the fear that crept along her spine like ice water. Kofi intercepted her near her tent. The commander wants you to eat with the officers tonight. He says it's to discuss medical needs for the camp, but he paused. Be careful. Some of the men don't like having you here. They think you're a weakness, a liability. And what do you think? I think you saved our commander's life, which makes you valuable. But valuable things in a camp like this, they don't always stay safe. You understand? Mara understood perfectly. She'd worked in enough unstable situations to recognize the dynamics. As long as Mabuto valued her medical skills, she was protected. But protection was conditional, circumstantial, and could evaporate the moment the calculus changed. I'll be careful, she said. The rest of the afternoon she spent organizing what remained of her medical supplies, taking inventory, calculating how long things would last. The numbers were grim. At current consumption rates, she had maybe 2 weeks of basic supplies, less if there were injuries or if Mabuto developed complications. As evening approached, Kofi returned to escort her to the officers' mess, a large tent where the camp's leadership gathered. Inside, a dozen men sat around a makeshift table, eating from tin plates and drinking from canteens that Mara suspected didn't contain water. Mabuto sat at the head, looking better than he had that morning, but still clearly in pain. He gestured for Mara to sit beside him. Gentlemen, he said, this is Dr. Vance. She's responsible for the fact that I'm still breathing. Show her appropriate respect. The men nodded, their expressions ranging from genuine gratitude to barely concealed resentment. Mara recognized the type, soldiers who saw anything resembling weakness or mercy as a tactical error. Food was served, better than what Mara had received earlier. Someone passed her a canteen. She took a cautious sip, definitely not water, some kind of local alcohol that burned going down. Dr. Vance, one of the officers said, a man with lieutenant's insignia crudely marked on his sleeve. "The commander says you worked at the mission. You must have treated many people from the villages." "I did. Mostly routine medical issues, some emergencies." "And did you ever treat anyone from our forces? Before the attack, I mean. People who came to the mission for medical care?" It was a trap question, designed to reveal whether Mara had treated enemy combatants, whether she could be accused of choosing sides. She navigated it carefully. "I treated anyone who came through the clinic doors. That's how medical care works. You don't ask about politics or affiliations. You ask about symptoms and provide treatment." "Very noble," another officer said, his tone suggesting it was anything but. "But surely you had opinions. The mission was funded by Western organizations, yes? They must have told you we were the enemy, terrorists, thugs. They told me you were a destabilizing force in the region, whether that made you terrorists or freedom fighters or something else entirely. That wasn't my concern. My concern was keeping people alive." "And now?" Mabuto interjected. "Now that you've seen what we do, what we're capable of, do you still maintain that neutrality?" Mara set down her fork, meeting his gaze directly. "I've seen what you're capable of. I've buried the people your forces killed. I've delivered a baby whose father died defending a compound that had nothing worth stealing except lives. So no, I don't maintain neutrality about the morality of what happened. But my medical practice remains neutral. I'll treat your wounded the same way I'd treat anyone else's wounded. That's not a political statement. It's a professional one." The tent fell silent. Several officers exchanged glances. Mabuto studied her with an expression Mara couldn't quite read. "You're either very brave or very foolish," he said finally. "I haven't decided which. The two aren't mutually exclusive." He laughed, then winced at the pain it caused. "No, I suppose they're not." The meal continued, conversation shifting to logistics, supply lines, tactical considerations. Mara ate quietly, listening, learning. The camp was part of a larger network of forces, she realized. Mabuto wasn't just a random warlord. He was part of a coordinated effort to control the region, to fill the power vacuum left by a weak central government. The attack on the mission hadn't been random violence. It had been strategic, designed to send a message about who held power in this territory. After the meal, Kofi escorted Mara back to her tent. The camp had settled into night rhythms, guards posted, fires banked, men sleeping in shifts. "You did well tonight," Kofi said quietly. "You didn't grovel, but you didn't provoke. That's a difficult balance." "I've had practice." Mara paused at her tent entrance. "Kofi, how long do you think they'll keep me here?" He was quiet for a moment. "As long as you're useful. As long as the commander needs a doctor. After that," he shrugged. "I honestly don't know. The commander is unpredictable, sometimes merciful, sometimes not." "And the other officers? The ones who clearly don't want me here?" "Lieutenant Ose thinks you're a spy. Captain Mensa, not the convoy commander, different man, thinks you're a weakness that will get us all killed. Others just don't like having a woman in the camp who they can't control in the usual ways." Kofi's expression darkened. "My advice? Stay close to medical work. Don't wander the camp alone. And if anyone tries anything, scream. Scream loud. The commander has made it clear you're under his protection, but some men need reminding." It wasn't reassuring, but it was honest. Mara thanked him and retreated into her tent. Sleep came fitfully that night, broken by sounds from the camp, men arguing, vehicles moving. Once the sharp crack of gunfire that made her bolt upright before realizing it was distant, unrelated to her. She lay back down, staring at the tent ceiling, and thought about Catherine and baby Emma. Wondered if they'd reach safety. Wondered if she'd ever see them again. 3 days passed. Mara fell into a routine, morning rounds checking Mabuto's wound, which was healing remarkably well. Afternoon clinic hours treating minor injuries and illnesses among the fighters. Evening meal with the officers where she remained polite, neutral, and carefully unrevealing. She learned the camp's rhythms, its hierarchies, which men to avoid and which could be cautiously trusted. Mabuto improved daily. By the 4th day, he was sitting up without assistance, walking short distances, regaining the strength and presence that made him a leader. He spent hours in strategy meetings that Mara wasn't privy to, planning operations she didn't want to know about. On the fifth day, everything changed. Mara was in her tent, reorganizing her dwindling medical supplies, when shouting erupted outside. She emerged to find the camp in sudden chaos, men running, weapons being distributed, vehicles starting up. Kofi appeared, his face grim. "We're moving, now, pack only essentials." What happened? Government forces, larger than expected, moving this direction. We have maybe 2 hours before they're on us. He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the command tent. "The commander wants to see you." Mabuto was standing, a feat that would have been impossible 3 days ago, surrounded by his officers, studying a map spread across a table. He looked up as Mara entered. "Dr. Vance, we have a situation." He pointed to the map. "Government troops are advancing from the east. We're evacuating the camp, splitting into smaller groups, dispersing into the countryside. You have 3 options." Mara's heart was racing, but she kept her voice steady. "What are they?" 1. You come with my group, continue as our doctor. We protect you. You treat our wounded. 2. We release you. You make your way on foot to the nearest town, maybe 20 miles south. The government forces will likely find you first. 3. He paused. 3. I turn you over to my men. Let them do what they want with you. It would be easier than bringing you along or risking that you'll give our position to the government. The threat was delivered matter-of-factly, without malice, but with absolute seriousness. Around the tent, the officers watched her, some clearly hoping she'd choose wrong, give them an excuse. "That's not 3 options," Mara said. "That's 1 option and 2 threats." "Perhaps, but you still need to choose." Mara thought rapidly. 20 miles through hostile territory alone. She'd never make it, and option 3 wasn't an option at all, which left going with Mabuto, deeper into whatever conflict was brewing. "I'll come with your group," she said. "On 1 condition. You're not in a position to negotiate." "I'm in exactly the position to negotiate. You need a doctor. You said so yourself, so here's my condition. No attacks on civilians. No more missions like the one that destroyed the compound. You want me to keep saving your men's lives? Then stop creating situations where innocent people die." The tent erupted. Officers shouted over each other, some outraged, some laughing at her audacity, some calling for her immediate execution. Mabuto raised his hand and silence fell instantly. "You think you can dictate our tactics?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "I think I can refuse to participate in atrocities. You can force me to come with you. You can't force me to provide medical care while you slaughter civilians." Mara's voice was steady despite the fear coursing through her. "I have limits. This is one of them." Mabuto stared at her for what felt like an eternity. Then he turned to his officers. "Everyone out, except Kofi." The officers filed out, several shooting Mara looks that promised retribution later. When only the 3 of them remained, Mabuto leaned against the table, his face tight with pain from standing too long. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met, or the stupidest," he said. "Possibly both." "I've been told that before." "I can't promise no civilian casualties. War's messy. People get caught in crossfire. Mistakes happen. I'm not talking about crossfire. I'm talking about deliberate targeting, execution of unarmed people, burning villages for strategic messaging." Mara stepped closer. "You're smart enough to know the difference. If you want me to keep you alive, to keep your men alive, then don't make me complicit in mass murder. And if I refuse your condition, then shoot me now, because I won't do it anyway, and we'll both save time." Kofi made a small sound, quickly suppressed. Mabuto studied Mara with an expression that mixed frustration and something that might have been admiration. "You're going to get yourself killed," he said finally. "Maybe, but not today, apparently. Do we have an agreement?" "We have an understanding. I'll give orders to minimize civilian casualties in our operations. I can't guarantee my men will always follow them." "Then discipline the ones who don't. You're the commander. Act like it." His jaw tightened. "Don't push your luck, Doctor." "I'm not. I'm setting boundaries. There's a difference." Mara grabbed her medical bag. "Now, are we evacuating or standing here arguing until the government forces arrive?" Mabuto shook his head, almost amused despite himself. "Kofi, get her ready to move. She rides with my group." He looked at Mara. "And Dr. Vance, and thank you for the surgery, for keeping me alive, despite everything. It was the closest thing to gratitude she'd get from a man like him, and Mara recognized it as such. She nodded once, then followed Kofi out of the tent. The camp dissolved with military precision. Within 30 minutes, everything of value was packed. Fires were extinguished, and the area looked like it had never been occupied. Mara was put in a vehicle with Mabuto, Kofi, and 2 other fighters. They drove southwest, away from the advancing government forces, into terrain that became progressively rougher. They traveled for hours, stopping once to refuel from hidden caches, then continuing. Night fell, and they drove without headlights, navigating by moonlight and the lead driver's intimate knowledge of the land. Other vehicles had peeled off, heading in different directions, making them harder to track. Around midnight, they stopped at what looked like an abandoned mining facility. Old equipment rusting in the moonlight, buildings half collapsed, a sense of desolation that made the refugee camp seem welcoming by comparison. "We stay here tonight," Mabuto announced. "Rotate guards. Move again at first light." Mara was given a corner of one of the more intact buildings, a space that smelled of mildew and decay but had a roof and walls. She spread her sleeping mat, used her medical bag as a pillow, and tried to ignore the sounds of men settling in for an uneasy night. Kofi found her in the darkness. "You should know. Lieutenant Osei is talking about you, saying you're going to betray us to the government forces, saying we should eliminate the threat before it becomes a problem." "And what do you think?" "I think you saved the commander's life, which should count for something. But I also think Osei isn't entirely wrong to be suspicious. You have no loyalty to our cause. If the opportunity came to escape, to make it back to your people, you'd take it, wouldn't you?" Mara didn't answer immediately. The honest answer was yes, she would escape if she could. But admitting that seemed unwise. "I'm a doctor," she said finally. "Not a soldier, not a political actor. My loyalty is to my patients, whoever they are. As long as I'm here, I'll do my job. If circumstances change, we'll deal with that when it happens." That's not exactly reassuring. It's the truth. Take it or leave it. Kofi was quiet for a moment. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be hard." He wasn't wrong. The next day brought more driving, more rough terrain, more constant vigilance for government patrols. They stopped twice. Once when one of the vehicles broke down and had to be abandoned. Once when scouts reported troop movements nearby, and they had to hide in a ravine for 3 hours while a patrol passed within a quarter mile. That evening, they reached what Mabuto called a safe house, a small village that was either loyal to his cause or terrified enough to pretend loyalty. The villagers brought food, offered shelter, and carefully avoided eye contact with the armed fighters. Mara was given a room in one of the village homes, a tiny space with a dirt floor and a single window covered with cloth. It was the most privacy she'd had in days, and she nearly wept with gratitude. A woman came with food, rice, vegetables, some kind of flatbread. She was maybe 50, with careful eyes and hands that shook slightly as she set down the plate. "Thank you," Mara said in the local language. Her vocabulary was limited, but she'd picked up basics during her time at the mission. The woman looked surprised. "You speak our language?" "A little. I'm learning." The woman hesitated, then sat down. "You're the doctor, the one who saved Commander Mabuto." "I am." "You should know, not everyone in this village supports him, but we have no choice. If we refuse hospitality, they burn our homes. If we cooperate, we live. It's not loyalty. It's survival." Mara set down her food. "I understand. I'm sorry you're in this position. Are you a prisoner, or did you join them willingly?" Mara paused, considering how to explain. "I made a choice to save lives. That choice put me here. Whether I'm a prisoner or a volunteer, I'm not sure there's much difference anymore." The woman nodded slowly. "My husband was killed by government forces 3 years ago. They said he was a rebel sympathizer. He wasn't. He was a farmer. But they killed him anyway." She looked directly at Mara. "Both sides create suffering, Doctor. The government and the rebels. They fight over territory and power while people like us just try to survive. Remember that, whatever happens next." She left before Mara could respond, leaving behind food and a warning and a glimpse into the impossible complexity of the conflict she'd stumbled into. Mara ate mechanically, thinking about the woman's words. Both sides create suffering. At the mission, the narrative had been simple. The rebels were the threat. The government was stability. The mission was neutral ground. But nothing here was simple. The government that was supposed to protect citizens killed farmers without proof. The rebels who claimed to fight for the people terrorized villages into compliance. And caught in between were civilians who just wanted to live. That night, she heard shouting outside. She went to the window, peering through the cloth cover. In the village center, Mabuto's men had gathered. One of them was holding a young man, barely more than a teenager, by the collar, shouting accusations. Mara grabbed her medical bag and went outside, against her better judgment. The scene was tense. Fighters surrounding the boy, weapons raised, Mabuto standing in front of him with an expression of cold fury. "What's happening?" Mara asked Kofi, who stood at the edge of the crowd. The boy was caught trying to signal government forces. Morse code with the light. He's a spy. Mara's stomach dropped. How old is he? 17, maybe 18. He's a child. He's a traitor. Kofi's voice was hard. The penalty is death. Mara pushed through the crowd before she could think better of it. Wait. Mabuto turned, his expression dangerous. Dr. Vance, this doesn't concern you. A child's life concerns me. What proof do you have that he was signaling anyone? We caught him with a flashlight, flashing patterns toward the ridge where government scouts were reported. Or he could have been... Mara looked at the terrified boy. What were you doing? The boy was crying, trembling so hard he could barely stand. I was looking for my goat. She wandered off. I was using the light to search. I swear I wasn't signaling anyone. Please. I don't know anything about Morse code or government forces. I'm just trying to find my goat before the hyenas get her. It could have been true. Or it could have been a lie told by a desperate, terrified child facing execution. Mara had no way to know. But what she did know was that killing him would accomplish nothing except adding one more body to the pile. Even if he was signaling, Mara said, shooting him makes you exactly what the government says you are. Murderers who kill children. We can't afford spies, then lock him up. Hold him until you move on. But don't execute a teenager based on suspicion. Mara stepped between Mabuto and the boy. You gave me your word. No targeting civilians. This is a civilian, a child. If you kill him, our agreement is void. The crowd went silent. Lieutenant Osei stepped forward. Commander, she's threatening you. She can't be allowed. She's not threatening, she's negotiating. Mabuto's eyes never left Mara's face. You're willing to stake your safety on this boy's innocence? I'm willing to stake my safety on the principle that we don't execute children without proof. Another long, terrible silence. Then Mabuto stepped back. Tie him up. Keep him under guard. We'll decide what to do with him in the morning. He leaned close to Mara. You're spending your protection very quickly, Doctor. Eventually, you'll run out. Then I'll run out. But not today. She turned and walked back to her room, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. She'd just put herself between a warlord and his perceived enemy, had challenged his authority in front of his men, had probably ensured that Lieutenant Osei and others would see her as an even bigger threat. But the boy was alive. For tonight, at least, that was enough. She lay on her sleeping mat, staring at the ceiling, and wondered how long she could keep walking this impossible line before something gave way beneath her. The boy was gone by morning. Mara discovered it when she emerged from her room at dawn, drawn by the absence of the usual sounds. No guards calling to each other, no engines warming up, just an eerie quiet that made her skin prickle. The village center where the boy had been tied to a post the night before was empty except for a coil of rope lying in the dirt. She found Kofi near the vehicles, checking ammunition supplies. His face was carefully neutral when he saw her. Where is he? Mara asked. The boy from last night. Released, commander's orders, send him back to his family with a warning to stay away from anything that looks like signaling. Kofi didn't meet her eyes. You should eat something. We're moving in 30 minutes. Mara wanted to believe him, wanted to think that Mabuto had actually shown mercy, but the set of Kofi's shoulders, the way he avoided her gaze, told a different story. Still, she didn't push. Sometimes in situations like this, not knowing for certain was the only mercy you got. They drove north this time, through terrain that grew increasingly dense with vegetation. The rainy season was approaching, Kofi explained, and soon these roads would be impassable. They needed to reach the northern stronghold before the weather turned. How far? Mara asked. 3 days if we don't run into trouble. 5 if we do. He glanced at her. You're quiet this morning. Regretting your intervention last night? No, just wondering how many more times I can intervene before someone decides I'm more trouble than I'm worth. That's the right question to be asking. Kofi lowered his voice. Lieutenant Osei held a meeting after you went to bed. Said you're undermining the commander's authority, making him look weak in front of the men. He's gathering support for a vote. A vote on what? On whether to keep you or eliminate you. It's how we handle internal disputes sometimes. Democratic, in its way. The bitter humor in his voice suggested he found nothing democratic about it. Mara felt cold despite the morning heat. And how does Mabuto feel about this vote? The commander doesn't know yet. Osei is being careful, feeling out support before making a formal challenge. Kofi checked that they were alone before continuing. You need to understand something. The commander respects you, maybe even likes you, in his way. But he's pragmatic. If the officers unite against you, if keeping you alive threatens his leadership, he'll sacrifice you without hesitation. So what do you suggest I do? Make yourself indispensable. Not just as a doctor. Osei will argue they can find another doctor or do without. You need to become necessary in a way that's harder to replace. He paused, and stop challenging the commander in front of his men. Negotiate in private if you must, but public confrontations make him look weak, and weak leaders don't last long out here. It was good advice, delivered by someone who seemed to genuinely want her to survive. Mara filed it away, adding it to her growing understanding of the complex power dynamics that govern Mabuto's forces. They stopped at midday to rest the vehicles and eat. Mara was checking Mabuto's wound, which continued to heal well, no signs of infection, when one of the scouts ran into camp, breathless and wild-eyed. Checkpoint ahead, government forces. They're stopping all vehicles, searching everyone. Mabuto swore viciously. How far? 5 kilometers. We can backtrack, find another route. Which adds 2 days to our journey, and we don't have 2 days. Mabuto stood, favoring his wounded side, but moving with increasing strength. Options. Give me options. The officers gathered, voices overlapping as they debated. Turn back. Fight through the checkpoint. Scatter and regroup. Each option had fatal flaws. Turning back meant delay they couldn't afford. Fighting would bring reinforcements. Scattering left them vulnerable. Mara listened, thinking. Then an idea formed, crazy and dangerous, but possibly workable. What if we don't hide? She said. The conversation stopped. Everyone turned to look at her. Explain, Mabuto said. Government forces are looking for rebels, right? Armed fighters, military-age men, weapons caches. They're not looking for a medical convoy. Mara's mind raced, piecing together the plan as she spoke. We're a mobile clinic, traveling to provide care in remote villages. I'm the lead physician, you're my patients and support staff. We hide the weapons, dress the part, create the illusion. That's insane, Lieutenant Osei said flatly. They'll see through it in seconds. Not if we sell it properly. I have medical credentials, documentation from the mission. We have actual medical supplies. Some of your men are genuinely wounded or sick. We make that visible, turn our vulnerability into our cover story. And what about the commander? Another officer asked. They might recognize him. He's post-operative, recovering from emergency surgery for a gunshot wound, which is true. We keep him sedated, bandaged, barely conscious. Just another patient being transported to better facilities. Mara looked at Mabuto. It's risky, but it might be less risky than the alternatives. Mabuto was silent, considering. Finally, he turned to his officers. Thoughts? It could work, Kofi said slowly. The government checkpoint guards, they're regular army, not special forces. They're looking for obvious threats. A medical convoy wouldn't trigger their protocols. Unless someone talks, Osei countered. Unless one of our men says the wrong thing, acts suspicious, gives us away. Then we choose carefully who goes through the checkpoint and who stays behind. Mabuto's voice took on the decisive edge of a leader making a call. Split the group. Minimum necessary personnel goes through as the medical convoy. Everyone else backtrack, take the long route, meet us at the rendezvous point. He looked at Mara. You'd have to sell this. Convince them you're legitimate. I am legitimate. I'm a doctor. That part's not a lie. Mara's heart was pounding, but her voice stayed steady. The question is whether you trust me to do this without betraying you. If you wanted to betray us, you've had opportunities. Mabuto's eyes were sharp, assessing. No, I don't think you'll deliberately give us away. But mistakes happen. Fear makes people sloppy. Can you handle the pressure? Mara thought about the well, the darkness, Catherine's labor, delivering a baby while violence raged above. Thought about Eleanor's face in death, Thomas's bloodied hands, the weight of impossible choices made in crisis moments. I can handle it, she said. They prepared quickly. Weapons were hidden in secret compartments or left with the group taking the alternate route. 3 vehicles would go through the checkpoint, Mara's, Mabuto's, and 1 supply truck. Personnel were chosen carefully. Kofi, whose steady demeanor wouldn't raise suspicion. 2 young fighters who could pass as medical assistants. A woman from the village. Mabuto's forces had recruited some women, Mara had learned, who would pose as a nurse. And Mabuto himself, heavily sedated with the painkillers Mara had been rationing, bandaged extensively, playing the role of critical patient. If this goes wrong, Osei said as they prepared to separate, the men will know who to blame. Mara met his hostile gaze. If this goes wrong, we'll all be dead or captured. Blame won't matter much. They drove in convoy formation, medical crosses hastily painted on the vehicle sides using white paint scavenged from the village. Mara rode in the lead vehicle, rehearsing her story, making sure her documentation was accessible. Behind her, Mabuto lay on a stretcher, his breathing slow and deep from the sedation, his face pale beneath the bandages. The checkpoint appeared around a curve. Military vehicles, armed soldiers, a portable barrier across the road. Mara's driver slowed, stopping when a soldier raised his hand. An officer approached, young and suspicious, his rifle held ready. Identification and travel documents. Mara handed over her credentials, medical license, mission documentation, travel permits that were technically expired but looked official enough. Dr. Mara Vance. We're a mobile medical unit operating in the region. These villages have no other healthcare access. The officer examined her papers, then looked past her into the vehicle. What's your destination? Northern District. We have patients requiring evacuation to better facilities. Mara kept her voice calm, professional. We've been operating out of the mission compound, but it was attacked last week. We're relocating our base of operations. The mission that was destroyed? We heard about that. Rebel activity. His eyes sharpened. You were there during the attack? I was. It's why we're evacuating. The area isn't safe anymore. Mara let genuine emotion creep into her voice, not hard given that every word was true. We lost colleagues, good people. I'm trying to save what's left of our operation. The officer's expression softened slightly. You saw the attackers? Could you identify them? This was the dangerous moment, the place where the story could fracture. Mara chose her words carefully. It was chaos. Dark, terrifying. I was hiding with patients. I heard gunfire, screaming. By the time it was over, the attackers were gone. Also true, technically. She had been hiding, had heard those things. That her patients included women who were now traveling with the alternate route group was a detail she omitted. I need to inspect the vehicles. Of course, but please be gentle with the patient in the second vehicle. He's post-operative, critical condition. Sudden movements could restart hemorrhaging. The officer moved through their small convoy methodically. He checked the supply truck first, finding exactly what Mara had promised, medical equipment and supplies. Then approached Mabuto's vehicle. Kofi, playing the role of anxious medical assistant, was genuinely nervous enough to sell it. Gunshot wound? The officer asked, looking at Mabuto's bandaged chest. Yes. Caught in crossfire between government forces and rebel fighters about a week ago. Civilian casualty. Mara had moved to stand beside the vehicle. I performed emergency surgery with limited resources. He needs better facilities or he won't make it. The officer leaned closer. examining Mabuto's sedated face. For a terrible moment, Mara thought he might recognize him. But Mabuto's features were slack from medication, his usual intensity completely absent. He looked like what he was pretending to be, a dying man being transported in desperation. "You have painkillers on board?" the officer asked. "Yes, but supplies are limited. Why?" "We have wounded from a skirmish yesterday. 2 soldiers. We've been waiting for medical transport, but..." He hesitated. "Could you spare any supplies? Or even just look at them? One of them is in bad shape." It was exactly the kind of complication Mara had worried about, the request that could derail everything, but refusing would raise suspicion, and 2 wounded soldiers meant 2 people who genuinely needed help. "Show me," she said. The soldiers were in a tent behind the checkpoint, and their condition made Mara's professional instincts override her fear. The first had a leg wound, infected and inflamed from inadequate care. The second had taken shrapnel to the abdomen, and the field dressing was soaked with blood and drainage that smelled wrong. "How long has he been like this?" Mara asked, kneeling beside the second soldier. "Since yesterday morning. We've given him water, tried to keep the wound clean, but..." The medic who'd been tending them looked young, overwhelmed, out of his depth. Mara did a quick assessment. The abdominal injury was serious, possibly perforating the intestine, certainly infected. Without surgery and antibiotics, he'd die, probably within 24 hours. The leg wound was manageable if treated properly. "I can stabilize them," Mara said, "clean the wounds, administer antibiotics, give you care instructions. But the one with the abdominal injury, he needs a hospital, real surgical intervention. The nearest hospital is 2 days away. Will he last that long?" Mara looked at the soldier's face, maybe 22 years old, scared but trying not to show it. She thought about all her speeches about medical neutrality, about treating anyone regardless of affiliation. Here was that principle tested in the most immediate way. "Bring me my medical bag," she told the young officer, "and get me clean water, lots of it. I'll do what I can." She worked for nearly an hour, cleaning wounds, administering precious antibiotics from her dwindling supply, teaching the medic proper dressing techniques. The soldier with the abdominal wound would need luck to survive, but she'd given him a chance. The one with the leg wound would probably be fine if infection didn't set in. As she finished, the young officer who'd first stopped them approached. "Thank you, doctor. You didn't have to help." "Yes, I did. It's what doctors do." Mara packed her supplies. "Get that abdominal case to a hospital as fast as you can. And change those dressings twice daily. Watch for fever. Any signs the infection is spreading." "We will." He paused. "I'm sorry about what happened at your mission. The people who did that, they're animals. We're trying to restore order to this region, but it's hard when the rebels have no respect for civilians, for humanitarian operations." Mara thought about the village woman whose farmer husband had been killed by government forces. Both sides create suffering. She kept her expression neutral. War is hard on everyone, soldiers and civilians alike. They were cleared through the checkpoint with unexpected courtesy, the young officer even providing them with updated maps marking safe routes and areas to avoid. As they drove away, Mara watched the checkpoint disappear in the rearview mirror and felt tension she hadn't realized she'd been holding begin to release. "You helped them," Kofi said quietly. "Government soldiers. Enemies. I helped wounded people who needed medical care. That's not the same thing as choosing sides. To some of our people, it will be." Mara knew he was right, but she also knew that the moment she started categorizing patients as worthy or unworthy based on their affiliations, she'd lose something essential about who she was. They drove for another hour before stopping to let Mabuto wake from sedation. He came around slowly, groggy and disoriented, blinking in the afternoon sunlight. "Did it work?" he asked, his voice thick. "We're through. No complications." Mara checked his pupils, his pulse. "How do you feel?" "Like I was hit by a truck." "What did you give me?" "Enough sedative to keep you convincingly unconscious. You'll be fuzzy for another few hours." She helped him sit up slowly. "And I used some of our antibiotic supply treating wounded government soldiers at the checkpoint. I'm telling you now so you don't hear it from someone else later." Mabuto's expression sharpened even through the drug haze. "You what?" "They had casualties, infected wounds. I treated them. Mara met his eyes. I told you, I'm a doctor. I don't screen patients based on politics. Some of my men will see that as betrayal. Some of your men see my existence as betrayal. I can't live my life worried about their opinions. Mara's voice was tired. I got us through the checkpoint. I kept your identity hidden. I treated patients who needed help. If that's a problem, we can address it. But I'm not apologizing for providing medical care. Mabuto stared at her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, a short, pained sound. You're consistent, at least. Aggravating, but consistent. They rendezvoused with the rest of the group that evening at a prearranged location, an abandoned farm with structures just intact enough to provide shelter. The reunion was tense. Lieutenant Osei immediately pulled Mabuto aside, and Mara could see from their body language that he was reporting on something, probably the vote Kofi had mentioned. As darkness fell, Mabuto called a meeting. Everyone gathered in the largest structure, fighters standing in loose formation, weapons visible, the atmosphere charged with unspoken conflict. Some of you have expressed concerns about Dr. Vance, Mabuto began, about her loyalty, her usefulness, her place in this unit. He stood at the front, his posture commanding despite his recent injury. Lieutenant Osei has asked for a formal vote on whether to keep her or eliminate her. I'm allowing that vote because I believe in addressing concerns directly. Mara felt every eye turn toward her. Her mouth went dry, but she kept her expression neutral, refusing to show the fear that was twisting her stomach into knots. Before we vote, Mabuto continued, let me remind you of facts. Dr. Vance saved my life. Without her, I'd be dead. She got us through a government checkpoint today using her credentials and quick thinking, and whether you like it or not, she has skills none of you possess. We have no other medical personnel. No one else who can perform surgery, treat serious injuries, manage medical emergencies. We managed before she came, Osei said. We'll manage after she's gone. Managed how? By letting wounded men die? By losing fighters to infections that could have been prevented? Mabuto's voice hardened. I've built this force by being practical, not sentimental. Dr. Vance is a resource. Eliminating her because she makes some of you uncomfortable is waste, and I don't tolerate waste. She treated government soldiers today, Osei countered. Used our medical supplies to help our enemies. How is that not betrayal? She treated wounded people. There's a difference. And her actions helped sell our cover story, which got us through the checkpoint intact. Mabuto looked around the room. But I'll let you decide. Those in favor of keeping Dr. Vance, raise your hands. Kofi's hand went up immediately. Then others, some of the younger fighters, men who'd seen Mara work, who'd benefited from her care. But not enough. Not nearly enough. Those in favor of elimination? More hands rose. Osei's and many others. Mara counted silently, her heart sinking. The vote was going to be close, maybe too close. Then a voice spoke from the back. I vote to keep her. Everyone turned. It was one of the oldest fighters, a man named Adebayo, who rarely spoke but commanded respect through sheer presence and experience. She has courage, Adebayo said simply. She walked into our camp knowing she might die. She stood up to the commander to save a boy's life. She treats anyone who needs help without asking questions. That's rare, worth keeping. Other hands rose after Adebayo spoke. The momentum shifted. When the final count was done, the vote to keep Mara had won by a narrow margin. It's settled, Mabuto said. Dr. Vance stays, and this subject is closed. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly. His tone made it clear that taking it up with him directly would be unwise. The meeting dispersed, fighters breaking into smaller groups, voices low with continued debate. Mara found herself standing alone until Kofi approached. That was closer than I'd like, he said. Tell me about it. Mara's hands were shaking now that the immediate threat had passed. How long before someone calls another vote? A while, probably. Mabuto won't allow it soon. It would make him look weak. But eventually? Kofi shrugged. You'll need to prove yourself again. Keep being useful. Keep saving lives. It's the only protection you have. That night, Mara lay on her sleeping mat in another borrowed room in another hostile space and thought about Catherine and baby Emma. Wondered if they were safe, if they'd reached the capital, if Emma was thriving. Wondered if she'd ever know. She thought about Eleanor, who'd believed that faith and discipline could protect against chaos. About Thomas, who'd died defending people he barely knew. About Sarah, who'd stayed to help even when she could have hidden. All of them gone now, reduced to memories and lessons about the cost of principle. And she thought about herself, trapped in an impossible situation, walking an impossible line, sustained only by the stubborn insistence that some things mattered regardless of circumstance. Medical ethics. Human dignity. The refusal to become something she couldn't recognize in the mirror. She didn't know how long she could maintain that position, but for now, for tonight, she was still alive. Still herself. And that would have to be enough. The next day brought new complications. They were moving through dense forest when one of the scouts returned with urgent news. A village ahead had been hit by some kind of outbreak. People dying, others fleeing in panic, the local clinic overwhelmed. "We go around," Osei said immediately. "Avoid contact. Disease is worse than bullets." But Mabuto looked at Mara. "What kind of outbreak?" The scout couldn't say, but villagers are describing fever, bleeding, rapid death. Kofi's face was grim. "Sounds like hemorrhagic fever, possibly Ebola." The word sent a chill through everyone. Ebola meant contagion, meant death rates that could reach 90%, meant the kind of biological threat that terrified even hardened fighters. "We definitely go around," Osei repeated. But Mara was thinking about transmission patterns, about epidemiology, about the way disease spread when left unchecked. If it's Ebola and people are fleeing the village, they're carrying it with them, spreading it to other communities. This region could become an epicenter. "Not our problem," Osei said. "It will be when our forces start catching it, or when trade routes shut down because the whole area is quarantined." Mara looked at Mabuto. "Outbreaks don't respect boundaries or affiliations. This becomes everyone's problem very quickly." "What would you need to assess the situation?" "Protective equipment, which we don't have. A way to isolate patients safely. Laboratory capability to confirm diagnosis." Mara paused. "In other words, resources we don't have. The smart move is probably to alert health authorities and stay clear." "Health authorities are government-controlled," Osei pointed out. "We report this. We reveal our position." "So we let it spread?" Mara felt frustration rising. Let people die because the political situation makes intervention complicated. "Yes," Osei said flatly. "That's exactly what we do. We're fighters, not humanitarian workers." "You can't separate the two." Mara's voice rose despite her effort to stay calm. "Disease destabilizes regions, creates refugee crises, overwhelms infrastructure. If you want to control this territory, you need to think beyond just military tactics." "I don't need a lecture from someone who's been here 2 weeks," Osei interrupted. "You don't understand this region, these people, what we're trying to accomplish. I understand that letting an epidemic spread unchecked is strategic suicide." "Enough!" Mabuto's voice cut through the argument. "Dr. Vance, what could you do with the resources we have, realistically?" Mara forced herself to think practically. "I could do an initial assessment, observe symptoms, transmission patterns, make an educated guess about what we're dealing with. If it's truly Ebola, we report it and get clear. There's nothing we can do without proper equipment. If it's something else, something more manageable, maybe we can contain it locally." "You'd be risking exposure." "Yes, but I'd be risking it anyway if infected people are fleeing into areas we'll be traveling through." Mara met his eyes. "This is what I do, Commander. Field epidemiology, crisis medicine, working with minimal resources in maximum chaos. Let me at least look." Mabuto considered, his face unreadable. Finally, he nodded. "You can do an assessment, but you stay at a distance. No direct contact with patients unless you're certain about what you're dealing with. And at the first sign that it's something truly catastrophic, you get out. Understood?" "Understood." They approached the village cautiously, leaving most of the fighters behind while a small team accompanied Mara, Kofi, 2 others, all armed and watchful. The village was eerily quiet, smoke rising from fires that had been left untended, the smell of sickness heavy in the air. A woman emerged from one of the buildings, moving slowly, holding herself like every step hurt. She saw Mara and stopped, her face desperate. "Are you doctors? Please, we need help. People are dying, and we don't know what to do." Mara kept her distance, watching the woman's gait, her skin color, looking for telltale signs. "What are the symptoms? Describe them exactly." "Fever first, then terrible pain in the stomach and back, then bleeding from the nose, the mouth, sometimes other places. People get weak, confused. Most die within 2 or 3 days. Hemorrhagic symptoms, rapid progression." It matched Ebola, but it also matched several other diseases. Mara needed more information. "How many are sick?" "Maybe 20. 10 have died already. Others fled before we knew how serious it was." "Did anyone travel to the village recently? Visitors from other areas, traders, anyone who might have brought this from elsewhere?" The woman thought. "A trader came through maybe 10 days ago, from the eastern regions. He was sick but said it was just fatigue. He stayed one night and left. 2 days later, the family who hosted him started showing symptoms. 10-day incubation period. That ruled out some possibilities, confirmed others. Mara wished desperately for laboratory capability, for the ability to test blood samples and know for certain what they were dealing with. "I need to see the sick," she said, "but I can't come into direct contact. Can you bring one patient to where I can observe them from a safe distance?" They brought out a young man, maybe 30, clearly in the later stages of whatever this was. His skin had a grayish pallor, his eyes were sunken, and he moved with the careful deliberation of someone in tremendous pain. When he coughed, Mara saw blood. She observed him for 10 minutes, asking questions through the woman who'd first greeted them, noting symptoms, progression, response patterns. And gradually, a picture emerged that was both terrifying and slightly less catastrophic than Ebola. "I think it's Lassa fever," she told Kofi quietly. "Still serious, still deadly, but not as contagious as Ebola. Spread primarily through contact with infected rodent droppings, not person-to-person transmission. Can you treat it?" "With the right antivirals, yes, but we don't have those. What we can do is implement basic infection control, reduce transmission, give people supportive care that improves their survival odds. You want to stay and help?" It wasn't a question. Kofi knew her well enough by now to predict her response. "I want to at least try," Mara said. "Leaving them like this, it goes against everything I am." "The commander ordered you to assess and leave." "The commander also said he values practical thinking. Practically speaking, if we can contain this outbreak, we protect our own forces and any civilian population we plan to operate among. That's worth a few days of intervention." Kofi looked at her with an expression that mixed exasperation and reluctant admiration. "You're going to get yourself killed. You know that, right?" "Probably, but not today." Mara turned back to the village. "Go tell Mabuto what we found. Tell him I'm implementing basic containment measures and will rejoin the group in 3 days. He can court-martial me or shoot me when I get back, but right now there's work to do." "He's going to be furious." "He's been furious before. I'm still here." Mara grabbed her medical bag. "Go, I'll be fine." Kofi hesitated, then nodded. 3 days. If you're not back by then, I'm coming to find you, one way or another." He left with the other fighters, and Mara turned to face the village alone. The woman who'd spoken to her earlier approached cautiously. "You're staying? You'll help us?" "I'll do what I can," Mara said. "But we need to move fast, and you need to do exactly what I tell you. Understood?" What followed was 3 days of desperate, exhausting work. Mara organized the villagers into teams, caregivers trained in basic infection control, burial details taught how to handle bodies safely, scouts who identified and sealed the rodent entry points in homes. She set up an isolation area for the sick, taught families how to make oral rehydration solution, how to recognize danger signs, how to comfort the dying when comfort was all that remained. She worked with materials scavenged from the village, cloth boiled into makeshift protective equipment, homemade bleach solution for disinfection, traditional herbs that might or might not have therapeutic value, but at least gave people something to do, some sense of agency in the face of catastrophe. 5 more people died despite her efforts, but 15 survived who might not have otherwise. And by the 3rd day, no new cases had emerged. The outbreak was contained, burned out, stopped before it could spread beyond the village boundaries. Mara was checking on the last recovering patient when Kofi arrived, accompanied by 2 fighters and an expression of profound relief. "You're alive," he said. "Did you doubt it?" "Every single moment." He looked around the village, at the organized isolation area, the burial site marked with simple stones, the families beginning to clean and rebuild. "The commander wants to see you. Immediately." "I bet he does." Mara gathered her supplies, said goodbye to the village woman who'd been her primary assistant, and walked with Kofi back toward where Mabuto's forces waited. Mabuto met her at the perimeter, his face a storm of conflicting emotions. "You directly disobeyed my orders." "I exceeded the scope of my assignment. There's a difference." "You risked exposure to a deadly disease, risked bringing infection back to our group, risked—" He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. "You risked everything for people you don't know, who mean nothing to our mission, who can't help us in any way. They're people. That's enough." Mara was too tired for diplomacy. "You can discipline me however you want, Commander, but I stopped an outbreak that could have spread through this entire region. That includes areas your forces operate in, villages you recruit from, trade routes you depend on. So you're welcome." She walked past him toward the camp, leaving him staring after her in what looked like equal parts anger and disbelief. That night, there was no vote, no meeting, just Mabuto appearing at her tent after dark, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met, or the most foolish," he said. It was almost word for word what he'd said before, and Mara wondered if this was his version of a compliment. "You've said that already. Have you decided which?" "Both. Definitely both." He sat down uninvited. "Why do you do it, Doctor?" "Vance? Why keep fighting for principles that don't serve you? You could make things so much easier on yourself by just following orders, staying quiet, not challenging everything." "Because the moment I stop fighting for those principles, I stop being someone I can live with." Mara looked at him directly. "You built your force on loyalty, discipline, tactical thinking. Those things matter to you because they're what you are. Medical ethics matter to me the same way. Take them away, and there's nothing left worth preserving. Even if those ethics get you killed? Especially then, because dying for something meaningful is still better than living as someone I don't recognize." Mabuto was quiet for a long moment. "You remind me of someone. A long time ago, before all this, I knew someone who talked like you, believed in principles the way you do." His voice grew distant. "She died because of those principles. Because she wouldn't compromise, wouldn't bend, wouldn't recognize that sometimes survival requires flexibility. I'm sorry. Don't be. She was right. I was the one who was wrong." He stood to leave. "Get some rest, Doctor. We reach the northern stronghold tomorrow. Things will be different there." "Different how?" "You'll see." He left, and Mara lay down, wondering what new complications tomorrow would bring. But for tonight, she was alive. The village had survived, and she was still herself. It would have to be enough. The northern stronghold appeared through morning mist like something from a fever dream. A compound carved into hillside, half hidden by vegetation, protected by natural terrain and deliberate fortification. It was larger than Mara had expected, more permanent, with structures that looked built rather than improvised. This wasn't a temporary camp. This was infrastructure. They drove through checkpoints manned by fighters who looked more disciplined than the scattered forces Mara had traveled with. These men had uniforms of sorts, insignia marking rank, the bearing of soldiers rather than guerrillas. As they passed deeper into the compound, Mara saw evidence of organization that challenged everything she'd assumed about Mabuto's operation. A functioning communications center, supply depots with actual inventory systems, even what looked like a school building where children sat in rows learning from a teacher. "This is different," Mara said to Kofi, who rode beside her. "The commander has been building this for 5 years. Started with nothing, worked toward something that could last." Kofi's voice held pride. "This isn't just about fighting. It's about creating an alternative to the government that abandoned these people. Healthcare, education, security, things they never had before." Mara wanted to point out that healthcare and education built on a foundation of violence and intimidation was compromised at best, But she was also seeing children who looked fed, healthy, engaged. Women moving through the compound without the haunted expressions she'd seen in the villages. People who seemed to have found something resembling stability in a region where stability was rare. They stopped at what was clearly the medical facility, a proper building with multiple rooms, equipment that looked recent, supplies organized with care that suggested someone who knew what they were doing had set this up. A woman emerged, maybe 45, wearing scrubs and an expression of professional assessment. She looked at Mara with sharp intelligence. "You're the doctor who saved the commander," she said. Not a question. "I am, Mara Vance. Dr. Amara Okonkwo. I run the medical operations here." She extended her hand and Mara shook it, processing the surname. "Any relation to Dr. Okonkwo from the mission?" "My brother. I heard he had a breakdown, that they sent you to replace him." Amara's expression was complicated. "He never could handle the weight of impossible choices. Too much empathy, not enough detachment. He cared about his patients. Caring isn't enough out here. You need to care and still function when caring would paralyze you." Amara gestured toward the facility. "Come, I'll show you what we've built." The medical center was impressive. Examination rooms, a surgical suite that, while basic, was light years beyond what Mara had worked with at the mission, a pharmacy with organized medication stocks, even a small laboratory for basic diagnostic work. "This is extraordinary," Mara said, genuinely amazed. "How did you—" "The commander prioritizes medical care, says healthy fighters are effective fighters, and healthy civilians are loyal civilians." Amara moved through the space with proprietary confidence. "I've been here 3 years, came after my brother left the mission. I couldn't stand the hypocrisy anymore. The mission pretended to help while serving Western interests. At least here, we're honest about who we serve." "You serve a warlord who attacks civilian targets." "I serve communities the government forgot. The attacks—" Amar's jaw tightened. "War is ugly. Both sides commit atrocities. At least we're trying to build something afterward." It was a seductive argument, Mara realized. The same logic that had probably drawn others to Mabuto's cause. The appeal of practical action over empty principle, of visible results over abstract ideals. But Mara had seen the bodies at the mission, had delivered a baby while her father's blood soaked into dirt outside. She couldn't forget that cost, couldn't let it be erased by impressive infrastructure and good intentions. "Why am I here?" Mara asked. "You clearly don't need another doctor. You've got this running smoothly." "The commander wants you integrated into the operation. Says you've proven yourself valuable, and he wants you somewhere you can do maximum good." Amara's expression suggested she had opinions about this decision, but was keeping them private. "You'll work here, help manage patient flow, teach the medical assistants I've been training. In return, you get safety, resources, a place in something larger than yourself. And if I say no, then you're a prisoner who happens to have medical skills. This is better. Trust me." Mara was given quarters in the medical facility, a small room but private, with an actual bed and a window that looked out over the compound. It was more comfort than she'd had since leaving the mission, and part of her wanted to accept this, to stop fighting and just survive. But that night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, she kept seeing Eleanor's face, Thomas's bloodied hands, Catherine's tears as she held a daughter her husband would never meet. All the people who'd died because someone had decided their lives were acceptable collateral damage in a larger struggle. The next morning, she began working in the clinic. The patient flow was steady. Fighters with combat injuries, civilians from surrounding communities with routine medical needs, children needing vaccinations, pregnant women wanting prenatal care. It was almost normal, this work, except for the armed guards and the knowledge of what sustained this place. A week passed, then 2. Mara fell into routines, learned the facility's systems, worked alongside Amara with professional efficiency, if not friendship. She treated infections and set broken bones and delivered babies, and tried not to think about how she was contributing to an operation built on violence. Lieutenant Osei appeared one afternoon, his arm badly infected from a wound he'd apparently ignored for too long. Mara cleaned it without comment, administered antibiotics, and wrapped it with professional detachment. "You're still here," he said, his tone making it clear this displeased him. Apparently. The commander protects you, for now. But protection is temporary. You should remember that. I remember everything, Lieutenant, including that you voted to have me killed. Mara met his hostile gaze. But you're my patient right now, so I'm going to treat you the same way I'd treat anyone. Come back in 3 days so I can check that the infection is clearing. After he left, Amara came to find her. You made an enemy there. I've made several enemies. Ose just happens to be the most vocal about it. Be careful. The commander's favor is real, but not absolute. If enough officers unite against you... Amara didn't finish the sentence. That evening, Mabuto summoned Mara to his quarters, a building separate from the others, guarded but not ostentatious. Inside, it was surprisingly simple. Maps on the walls, a desk covered in papers, few personal effects, the room of someone who lived for purpose rather than comfort. You've been here 2 weeks, he said. Dr. Okonkwo says you're competent, professional, that patients respond well to you. High praise from someone who clearly has reservations about my presence. Amara has reservations about everything. It's what makes her good at her job. Mabuto gestured for Mara to sit. I want to know if you're settling in, if this arrangement is working. Are you asking as my employer or my captor? Both, neither. I'm asking as someone who's invested considerable political capital in keeping you alive and wants to know if it's worth the cost. Mara chose her words carefully. The medical facility is well run. The work is meaningful. I'm able to practice medicine at a level that was impossible at the mission. She paused. But I haven't forgotten how I got here, or what this organization has done. I wouldn't expect you to forget. Forgetting would make you less valuable. It's your conscience that makes you push for better, that makes you challenge decisions that need challenging. Mabuto leaned back in his chair. Do you know why I really brought you here? To this stronghold? I assumed it was practical. Better medical facility, safer location? Partially. But also because I wanted you to see this. The schools, the clinics, the infrastructure we're building. I wanted you to understand that we're not just destroyers. We're trying to create something. Built on violence? Everything is built on violence. The government you probably preferred? They used violence to establish control. The colonial powers before them? Violence. The Western organizations that funded your mission? They only operated here because their governments used violence to create stable conditions. Mabuto's voice was passionate, engaged. At least we're honest about it. At least we're using that violence to build something for people who've been abandoned by every other authority. The people at the mission weren't abandoned. They chose to be there, to help on their terms, to impose their values, their beliefs, their version of civilization. He stood, pacing. You know what my real crime is, Dr. Vance? It's not the violence. Both sides use violence. My crime is refusing to let outsiders decide what's best for this region, for insisting that we have the right to determine our own future, even if that future looks different from what Western humanitarians think it should be. Mara could see the appeal of his argument, the way it reframed narrative from warlord to liberation leader, but she'd also seen the bodies, and no amount of political philosophy could erase that. Eleanor Graves didn't deserve to die, she said quietly. Neither did Thomas Hale or Sarah or any of the others. They were trying to help, however imperfectly. They didn't deserve execution. I gave orders to avoid civilian casualties. My men exceeded those orders. For the first time, Mabuto's voice held something that might have been regret. War makes monsters of ordinary men. I can't control every action, every moment of violence. All I can do is try to direct it towards strategic purpose and minimize the waste. Those people weren't waste. They were human beings with names and families, and I know, he cut her off. I know, Dr. Vance, but if I let myself feel the full weight of every death, I'd be useless. Just like my brother was useless. Just like... He stopped. Just like the woman you mentioned, the one who died for her principles. Mabuto's face closed off. That's not relevant. It's entirely relevant. You carry ghosts too. You've just gotten better at pretending they don't haunt you. Mara stood. Is there anything else you wanted to discuss, Commander? Or was this just an exercise in justification? I don't need to justify anything to you. Then why are we having this conversation? They stared at each other across the room, two people from completely different worlds, who'd somehow ended up in the same impossible situation, each trying to maintain principles that didn't quite fit the reality they inhabited. "I wanted you to understand," Mabuto said finally. "That's all. I wanted you to see that this isn't simple, that good people can make terrible choices trying to achieve necessary goals. I understand that already. I've been living it since the day I arrived at the mission." Mara moved toward the door. "But understanding doesn't equal acceptance. I can acknowledge the complexity and still believe some lines shouldn't be crossed. And when maintaining those lines means more people die, then more people die. But at least they die in a world where some things still matter." She paused at the door. "Good night, Commander." 3 days later, everything changed. Mara was in the clinic treating a child with a respiratory infection when Kofi burst in, his face urgent. "Government forces, large convoy, heavily armed, heading this direction. They'll be here within hours." The clinic erupted into controlled chaos. Patients were evacuated to safer locations, equipment was packed, contingency plans were activated with the efficiency of people who'd practiced for this scenario. Amara directed her staff with sharp commands, while Mara tried to help where she could. "What happens now?" Mara asked. "We fight if we have to, evacuate if we can." Amara was loading essential medications into crates. "The commander will make the call." The compound transformed. Fighters took up defensive positions, vehicles were prepared for rapid departure, civilians were moved to sheltered areas. Mara found herself in the surgical suite, preparing it for casualties, knowing that whatever happened next would likely fill this room with wounded and dying. Mabuto appeared in the doorway, looking like he'd barely slept. "Dr. Vance, Dr. Okonkwo, I need your medical assessment. If we fight, how many casualties can you handle?" Amara answered without hesitation. 30, maybe 40, if they're spread out. More than that, and we're overwhelmed. And the government forces are at least 200 fighters, well-equipped, well-trained. Mabuto's jaw tightened. Fighting is suicide. "So we evacuate?" Amara asked. "We negotiate." The word hung in the air like something toxic. Amara's eyes widened. "You can't be serious. They'll want complete surrender. They'll want to avoid a bloodbath. This position is defensible. We could hold out for days, inflict serious casualties before they overrun us. That gives us leverage." Mabuto looked at Mara. "And we have something they want. Something they need." Mara felt cold certainty settle into her stomach. "You're going to trade me. You're a Western physician, taken during the mission attack. They've probably been searching for you. Your safe return would be a propaganda victory for them, proof that they're restoring order, protecting humanitarian workers." He spoke without apology, just stating facts. "I can negotiate favorable terms in exchange for your release. You're going to hand me over to people who might execute me as a collaborator. The government wants to look civilized. They won't execute a doctor who was clearly taken against her will." Mabuto stepped closer. "This is the play, Dr. Vance. It protects my people, gets you to safety, and avoids a battle that would kill hundreds. Everyone benefits. Except that I have no say in this. You had no say in coming here either. This is just the mirror image of that decision." His expression was unreadable. "I'm sorry. If there was another option, I'd take it, but there isn't." Kofi arrived with news that government forces were requesting parley. Mabuto left to prepare, and Mara found herself standing in the surgical suite, processing the fact that her captivity was ending, but in a way that felt less like rescue and more like being traded like cargo. Amara touched her shoulder. "For what it's worth, I think he's making the right call. You don't belong here, you never did. Where do I belong? At a mission that got destroyed? With a government that sees me as either victim or traitor? I don't fit anywhere anymore. Maybe that's what this experience has taught you, that belonging is temporary, that all you can do is try to help where you are for as long as you're there." Amara's voice was surprisingly gentle. "You did good work here. You saved lives. That matters, regardless of the context." The negotiation happened at the compound's main gate, with both sides maintaining careful distance. Mara watched from a guarded position, seeing Mabuto speak with a government colonel, seeing terms being discussed, seeing her fate being decided by people who saw her as a tactical asset rather than a person. After an hour, Mabuto returned. "It's done. They've agreed to withdraw and allow us to evacuate in peace. In lots, in exchange, we release you and provide intelligence on rebel positions in the southern region. Intelligence I'm happy to give them, since those groups are our competitors anyway. When? Now. They want you immediately, and I want them gone before they change their minds. He gestured toward a vehicle. Gather your things. Kofi will escort you to the handover point. Mara had little to gather, her medical bag, a few items of clothing. She said brief goodbyes to Amara, to the medical assistants she'd trained, to patients she'd been treating. Then she climbed into the vehicle with Kofi, and they drove toward the gate. I'm supposed to hate you, Kofi said as they drove. You're the enemy, a Western outsider, someone who doesn't understand our struggle. But I don't. You're just someone trying to do right in a situation where right is complicated. That's the kindest thing anyone has said to me in weeks. The commander wanted me to give you this. He handed her an envelope. Don't open it until you're safely away. The handover was clinical. Government soldiers took custody of Mara at a neutral point, checking her identity, asking brief questions, then loading her into their vehicle. She looked back once and saw Kofi watching, his hand raised in something between a wave and a salute. Then they were driving away, and the stronghold disappeared behind them. The government forces treated her with wary courtesy. They asked about her capture, her treatment, whether she'd been coerced into providing medical care. Mara answered carefully, providing information that was technically true while omitting details that would endanger people she'd come to. Not like exactly, but recognized as human. You saved Commander Mabuto's life, the colonel said. It wasn't accusatory, just statement of fact. I'm a doctor. That's what doctors do. Even for terrorists? Even for patients. The rest is politics, and politics isn't my jurisdiction. They drove for 2 days, stopping at military checkpoints, gradually moving toward the capital. At one stop, a communications officer approached with news. Dr. Vance, we've located some of the survivors from the mission convoy. They've been asking about you. A woman named Catherine Hale and her infant daughter specifically wanted to know if you survived. Mara felt something break open in her chest. Relief so intense it was almost painful. They're alive? They're safe? In the capital, under protection. Would you like us to arrange a meeting? Yes, please. That night, in a guarded room in a government facility, Mara finally opened Mabuto's envelope. Inside was a single page, handwritten. Dr. Vance, you challenged everything I believed about outsiders, about Western interference, about whether conscience and pragmatism could coexist. You were infuriating, stubborn, and completely unwilling to compromise your principles, even when compromise would have been easier. I respect that more than you know. The woman I mentioned, the one who died for her principles, her name was Amara. She was my wife, Amara Okonkwo's sister-in-law, and she believed the same things you do, that some lines can't be crossed, that maintaining humanity matters more than tactical advantage. I couldn't protect her then. I couldn't make her see that purity gets you killed in this world. But maybe she was right, and I was wrong. Maybe dying with your principles intact is better than living without them. You reminded me of that possibility. Thank you for that. And thank you for saving my life, even though everything I represent disgusts you. It was more grace than I deserved. Stay safe, Doctor. The world needs people like you, even if people like me make it harder for you to survive. Mabuto. Mara read it twice, then burned it in the candle flame, watching the paper curl and blacken. Some things were too complicated to preserve. The capital was chaotic, crowded, overwhelming after weeks in remote regions. But the government had arranged for Mara to stay in decent housing while they processed her repatriation. And the first morning there, Catherine arrived. She looked different, stronger somehow, despite the exhaustion of new motherhood. Emma was in her arms, nearly a month old now, alert and healthy. You're alive, Catherine said, tears streaming. We heard rumors, but no one knew for certain. I'm alive. And you both look amazing. Mara touched Emma's tiny hand, felt the grip of perfect fingers. She's beautiful, Catherine. She is, and she's here because of you. Catherine's voice broke. Thomas is gone. Eleanor, Sarah, so many others. But Emma is here. That has to mean something. They spent the day together, Catherine sharing what had happened after the convoy reached safety. The trauma of resettlement, the struggle to grieve Thomas while caring for a newborn, the tentative plans to return to the States eventually, but not yet, not while the wound was so raw. "What about you?" Catherine asked. "What happens now?" "I don't know. The government wants me to testify about what I saw, but they're also suspicious about the medical care I provided to rebels. The organizations that funded the mission don't know what to do with me. I'm either a hero or a collaborator, depending on whose narrative you believe." Mara looked out the window at the city. "Honestly, I'm just tired. Tired of impossible choices. Tired of navigating between different versions of right and wrong." "Will you go back to field medicine, crisis work?" "Eventually, probably. It's what I know. What I'm good at." Mara smiled without humor. "But maybe somewhere less complicated next time. Somewhere the lines between good and bad are clearer." "Do places like that exist?" "Probably not, but I can hope." 3 weeks later, Mara sat in a debriefing room with government officials, humanitarian organization representatives, and people whose job titles she didn't fully understand. They asked questions about the mission attack, about her captivity, about her observations of rebel operations. She answered honestly but carefully, walking the same impossible line she'd been walking since this began. "Did you provide medical care to rebel fighters willingly?" one official asked. "I provided medical care to patients who needed it. Whether I did so willingly or under coercion, the distinction seems academic. People were hurt. I'm a doctor. I helped them. But you understand that providing aid to terrorists is a crime. I understand that letting people die when you have the ability to save them is also a crime. Perhaps not legally, but ethically." Mara met the official's eyes. "I made the choices I could live with. If that makes me a criminal, then prosecute me. But know that I'd make the same choices again in the same situation." They didn't prosecute. In the end, the politics were too complicated, the narratives too mixed. Mara was neither hero nor villain, but something in between. A doctor who'd done her job in impossible circumstances, whose story didn't fit neatly into anyone's preferred version of events. The humanitarian organization offered her a position in a safer region. The government suggested she might consult on rural healthcare initiatives. Several medical schools asked her to speak about crisis medicine and ethical decision-making under pressure. She turned down everything. Instead, she packed her belongings, said goodbye to Catherine and Emma with promises to stay in touch, and bought a ticket to a different region entirely. Somewhere she'd never worked before. Somewhere the ghosts might be different. At the airport, waiting for her flight, she saw a news report on a screen. Government forces had raided Maputo's northern stronghold. There had been fighting, casualties on both sides. No confirmation yet on whether Maputo himself had survived. Mara watched the footage, smoke rising from buildings she recognized, the same compound where she'd worked and argued and tried to maintain principles that didn't quite fit the reality around them. She didn't know if Maputo was dead or alive, didn't know if Kofi or Amara had survived, didn't know what would happen to the communities that had depended on the infrastructure he'd built. All she knew was that the cycle continued. Violence begetting violence, both sides convinced of their righteousness, civilians caught in between, and people like her trying to save lives while the world burned. Her flight was called. Mara shouldered her bag, the same scarred medical bag she'd carried through a dozen impossible situations, and walked toward the gate. She didn't know what waited at her destination. More crisis, probably. More impossible choices. More situations where doing right required navigating between competing wrongs. But she'd learned something in the darkness of that well, in the surgical suite where she'd saved a warlord's life, in the village where she'd stopped an outbreak with nothing but stubborn determination. She'd learned that principle wasn't about purity. It was about refusing to surrender your humanity, even when the cost was high, even when no one would blame you for choosing otherwise. Eleanor had believed in order and discipline and structures that would protect against chaos. Thomas had believed in defending what mattered regardless of personal cost. Sarah had believed in helping even when help was dangerous. Maputo had believed in building something better through violence that he told himself was necessary. Mara believed in showing up, in doing the work, in treating patients as people regardless of which side they fought for or what politics they represented. It wasn't glamorous or simple or likely to change the fundamental brokenness of places like the region she was leaving behind. But it was what she had, And sometimes that was enough. The plane lifted off, carrying her toward whatever came next. Below, the capital receded, a city full of refugees and survivors and people trying to rebuild from rubble. Somewhere down there, Catherine was learning to mother without Thomas. Emma was growing into a world her father would never see. Grace was raising her son. Little Daniel was learning to live without his mother, Sarah. They would survive or they wouldn't. The region would find peace or it wouldn't. Mabuto's vision would endure or it would collapse like every other attempt to impose order on chaos. Mara couldn't control any of that. All she could control was whether she showed up the next time someone needed a doctor, whether she maintained the principles that defined her even when maintaining them cost everything, whether she stayed human in situations designed to strip humanity away. As the plane climbed higher, breaking through clouds into brilliant sunlight, Mara closed her eyes and let herself feel, really feel, everything she'd been holding back. The grief for people lost, the anger at systems that created impossible choices, the exhaustion of fighting to maintain ethics in places where ethics felt like luxury, the small, stubborn hope that it mattered anyway. And somewhere deep beneath it all, a truth she'd always known but had proven again in darkness and fear and the stark clarity of crisis. She was a doctor, not because of the credentials or the training or the recognition, but because when someone was dying and she had the ability to help, she couldn't walk away. That was who she was. That was who she would always be. And no amount of complexity or compromise or impossible circumstance could change it. The baby Catherine had named Emma would grow up in a world still broken, still violent, still full of people making terrible choices in pursuit of better outcomes. But she would grow up. She would live. And that was worth something. It had to be. Below, the landscape transformed from city to countryside, from familiar territory to unknown horizons. Mara opened her eyes, looked out at the vast expanse of earth and sky, and felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Not peace exactly, not closure, but a sense of having survived something that should have destroyed her and emerging still herself, still flawed and stubborn and entirely too principled for the world she inhabited, but herself. And that, in the end, was the only victory that mattered. The story that began in a fragile mission on the edge of collapse had ended here, 30,000 feet above a world that wouldn't remember this particular crisis, this particular struggle, this particular set of impossible choices. Other crises would come. Other struggles would demand attention. The news cycle would move on, and the people who'd lived through this would become footnotes in someone else's geopolitical analysis. But Mara would remember. Catherine would remember. And somewhere, whether Mabuto had survived or not, the people who'd been touched by these events would carry them forward into whatever came next. That was the real story. Not the violence or the politics or the competing narratives of who was right and who was wrong, but the human cost. The choices people made when everything fell apart. The question of whether maintaining your principles in hell made you strong or foolish, and whether there was really any difference between the two. Mara had her answer. She'd paid for it in blood and fear and nights spent wondering if she'd see another dawn. But she had it, and she was still here to tell it.